To you, Mr. Mayor, I can confirm that it is 5:54 and our recording and streaming is on. You may begin your meeting.
Okay, thank you very much, Madam Clerk. Good afternoon, members of council, members of SLT, and members of the viewing public. I apologize for this meeting starting some 20 minutes late. We had an in-camera meeting previous to this one, and it obviously went a little late. But we're ready to go now, and the first up is Councillor Wink with the land acknowledgement statement.
Thank you, Mayor. We begin this meeting by acknowledging the land on which we gather as the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe peoples, many of whom continue to live and work here today. This territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties and is within the land protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. Today, this gathering place is home to many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples, and acknowledging reminds us that our great standard of living is directly related to the resources and friendship of Indigenous people.
Thank you, Councillor. Before we move on to the next item, just one little announcement that today is the first day that regional councillors will be allowed to attend meetings in person if they so choose. For the months of April and May, only 50% of the councillors will be allowed into the council chambers to facilitate social distancing. But as of June 1st, all regional councillors will be encouraged to attend regional council meetings in person. So a somewhat big step at the region after got to be a little over 2 years. Thank you. Madam Clerk?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, I do have a motion put forth by Councillor Hildebrandt, seconded by Councillor Olson, that the agenda be amended to move item 10.2.3, Town of Pelham Parking Study Strategy Report 2022-0081 after item 4.2.1, RV Anderson delegation with respect to the parking strategy. To you, Mr. Mayor, for any debate on that amendment.
Okay. Any council member have a debate on this amendment? Not seeing any, Madam Clerk.
Thank you. This vote begins with Councillor Hahn.
Yes.
Councillor Hildebrandt.
Yes.
Councillor Kaur.
Yes.
Councillor Olson.
Yes.
Councillor Stewart.
Yes.
Councillor Wink.
Yes.
Mayor Junkin.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That motion does carry. That does bring you to the main motion as amended. And I do have a motion put forth by Councillor Hildebrandt, seconded by Councillor Olson. Be it resolved that the agenda for the April 4th, 2022 meeting of council be adopted as amended. To you, Mr. Mayor, for any discussion.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Any questions, debate on this amendment as, on the agenda as amended? Not seeing any, Madam Clerk.
Thank you. The first vote begins with Councillor Hildebrandt.
Yes.
Councillor Kaur.
Yes.
Councillor Olson.
Yes.
Councillor Stewart.
Yes.
Councillor Wink.
Yes.
Councillor Hahn.
Yes.
Mayor Junkin.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That does carry. That does bring you to the disclosure of pecuniary interest and the general nature thereof.
Thank you. After viewing the agenda, does any council member have a pecuniary interest to declare? Not seeing any, Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have so noted that. Mr. Mayor, that does bring you to item 4, which is presentations. The first regular item is generally from Chief Limburner. However, he's not in attendance today, and I do believe that the CAO will be able to take over for himself and also provide his own update to COVID-19.
Mr. CAO, you have the floor.
Very good. Thank you, Your Worship. Good evening, Council. With respect to COVID, I think the most significant announcement is that the town of Pelham's had some excellent success with the Go Vax bus. We consistently have numbers, very good attendance numbers. And of course, that predominantly, that happens outside the building. We've also had the Red Cross in this calendar year. The next scheduled visit of the GoVax bus to the MCC will be on Thursday of this week. They'll be there from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. And they're scheduled to return twice a month, every month until July. So that's what we're offering vis-a-vis vaccination opportunities to residents. Beyond that, with respect to the statistical information that the chief normally reports on, and keeping in mind that all of this data is less than what we believe reality to be, it's just the known confirms. The town of Pelham currently has 132 active cases, or has had 132 active cases over the past 28 days, which puts us ranked 7th out of the 12 local area municipalities as far as infection rate goes in Niagara. In Niagara, there are 44 new cases today, for a total active case count of 1,256 confirmed, and thus far into the pandemic, 527 Niagarans have died. There are currently 10 outbreaks, and then with respect to vaccination rates, Niagara continues to trail on the Ontario average. The Niagara average is that 89.1% of us have had second dose or better, and across Ontario, that's 91%. We also have 2% of our population has had a first dose. So yeah, the 89.1, and 1.8% around across Ontario have had just a first dose. And then nationwide, 3,000 confirmed cases across Canada today, and 37,690 Canadians have perished. And that is the statistical update. Subject to questions, that is my report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. CAO. Any questions or comments on the CAO's report? Not seeing any, Madam Clerk?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, I do have a motion put forth by Councillor Wing, seconded by Councillor Kaur. Be it resolved that Council receive the COVID-19 update presentation from D. Cribbs, Chief Administrative Officer, for information. To you, Mr. Mayor, if there's any other comments.
Okay. Any further comments? Not seeing any?
Thank you. This vote begins with Councillor Olson.
Yes.
Councillor Stewart.
Yes.
Councillor Wink.
Yes.
Councillor Hahn.
Yes.
Councillor Hildebrandt.
Yes.
Councillor Kaur. Sorry, Councillor Kaur, you're on mute.
I'm sorry, yes.
Thank you. Mayor Junkin.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That does carry. To you, Mr. Mayor, that does bring you to your delegations. We do have a registered delegates tonight, and it is from R.V. Anderson. I'll just ask Ms. Leach to please bring in our presenters. For council's information, the presenters are Nick Palaboma and it is Adam Millenberg who are here to present. Just waiting for, we have one presenter in, just waiting for the second one.
Hello, this is Adam Mildenberger. I'm here with Nick Palumba as well.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you.
Okay, well, we're waiting for Nick to show up on his own separate camera, but he's there with you. Excellent. Gentlemen, thank you for joining council tonight, and we are anxious to hear your presentation.
Okay. Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, council, for having us. So I will share screen here. Okay, are you able to see the presentation?
Yes, we can in chambers. All councils can see that?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead, sir.
Actually, if you wanted to get rid of your next slide, it'll make the present slide that much larger to read.
Ah, yes. Yeah, let me just go ahead.
Perfect.
That better?
You bet.
Thank you. Okay, well, thank you for having us. My name's Adam Mildenberger, and I'm here with Nick Palumba, and we are from R.B. Anderson and Associates. And we've undertaken the Town of Pelham Parking Strategy Study. What you're seeing here is an agenda for some of the topics I'm going to cover in today's presentation, and I'll try to move swiftly through the presentation, keeping time. Firstly, I'll be going over the purpose and the approach for our study. I will then discuss our data collection efforts and the analysis we've completed of the collected data. Then I will cover some of the key findings from our study, as well as cover our preliminary recommendations. Then we will just wrap up the presentation with a question and answer period. So the purpose of this study was to develop a parking strategy for the downtowns of Fonthill, Fenwick, and Ridgeville, and for the Meridian Community Center. The study can generally be broken down into two key phases. So phase one would be us evaluating what is the current parking demand within these study areas through a various inputs, whether it be the stakeholder consultation activities, a review of parking standards, as well as field surveys. And then secondly, phase two was an evaluation of what is the future parking demand for these study areas with consideration for growth in the town, as well as the impacts that COVID has had on our field data, and developing some recommendations to improve the parking supply and the parking situation in these various study areas. So we undertook data collection and analysis for the 4 community areas that were covered in the study. So that includes Fenwick, Ridgeville, downtown Fonthill area, and the Meridian Community Center. And as part of the data collection efforts, we undertook various activities, including an inventory of the town's parking supply, stakeholder engagement activities, occupation and parking duration surveys, as well as an assessment of the existing parking situation. A subsequent part of this study was forecasting the future parking demand in these study areas. So one of the key things we looked at was what were the impacts that COVID and the COVID-related restrictions had on the field data we collected, and in doing so, develop some adjustment factors to mitigate those impacts COVID had. So for example, for the Fenwick, Ridgeville, and Fonthill areas, studies that we've reviewed have found that demand and traffic in general has seen reductions in the realm of 20 to 30% due to COVID restrictions. With respect to the MCC, a review of historical attendance data for the center and current attendance data found that with a decrease in events and room rentals and a decrease in attendance and spectators, that approximately a 30% reduction in demand may have occurred during the COVID restrictions. One other thing we looked at as well was the impact of the lack of tournaments occurring at the MCC during COVID. So these are different things that went into our analysis of future conditions post-COVID. We also looked at general growth in the town of Pelham and looked at how would parking demand increase over the next 10 years and how would that impact the findings of our study. So for the Fenwick, Ridgeville, and Fonthill areas, we looked at a low growth scenario if demand for parking were to increase by 10% over 10 years, or approximately 1% per year, or a potential high growth scenario if demand were to increase by a total of 20% over the next 10 years, or approximately 2% growth per year. And for the Meridian Center, we looked at a growth rate of approximately 10% over the total 10-year period to reflect growing demand for the facilities and services offered at the MCC. So the next several slides, I'm going to provide a brief overview of some of the key findings from our study. So for the Fenwick area, the current parking supply is sufficient to meet existing peak demand. Our surveys found that parking demand peaked during the weekday with the utilization of the overall parking supply, that being on-street parking and the municipal parking lot, peaking at approximately 65% utilization. With respect to parking duration, that being how long are people typically parking within these various facilities, on-street parking exhibited more of a snappier or faster turnover, with the majority of people parking for less than 1 hour. That is typically what you would expect and is desirable for an on-street parking facility. And for the municipal lot, parking duration was generally longer, with over half of people parking in the municipal lot parking for longer than 1 hour. And again, this is something that you would typically expect and is a proper use of this type of facility. There were instances observed of the public parking at the Clarence's Service Center, which is a private parking lot, and then crossing the street to use other business establishments. In our projecting for future conditions, when you consider the impacts COVID may have had on parking demand during the field surveys, we estimate that the utilization of the overall parking supply in Fenwick could reach approximately 75% post-COVID. Now, when you factor additional growth in parking demand over the next 10 years in response to general population and growth and development across the town, the utilization of the parking supply in Fenwick could reach as high as 90%. It's also important to consider that from a planning standpoint, it's desirable to maintain 10% approximately reserve capacity. This is to help provide additional reserves for any additional growth or special events that may occur. So in looking out those 10 years, even without the 10% reserve capacity, our projections show utilization could reach approximately 90%, indicating that at the 10-year horizon, there may be a need to provide additional parking capacity in the Fenwick area. For the Ridgeville area, the parking supply is currently insufficient and does not meet existing parking demands. Our surveys found that during our Saturday survey that the peak period exhibited 160% utilization, meaning there was a significant number of vehicles parking in non-designated spaces, such as the municipal water station lot across the street, which does not have designated public parking. With respect to parking duration, on-street parking had fairly quick turnover, with the vast majority of people parking for less than 1 hour, which is what would be expected. The fact that there is a parking supply concern is something also that was raised by the local business community through some of our outreach efforts. So with the parking supply currently at capacity and actually exceeding capacity with vehicles parking in the water station facility, any additional growth in parking demand associated with COVID restrictions being eliminated in the future, as well as potential general growth in the town of Pelham, would see a significant parking shortfall in Ridgeville, almost to a factor of 2. So we would anticipate approximately 15 parking spaces would be needed at a 10-year horizon in order to meet that demand. For the Fawn Hill area, the overall parking supply is considered sufficient for existing demands. Our surveys on both weekdays and Saturdays observed approximately 40% utilization across the entire study area. That includes both the on-street facilities and the municipal lots. Specifically with on-street parking, utilization peaked at about 60%. And specifically for on-street parking on Pelham Street in the vicinity of Highway 20, it peaked at approximately 70% utilization. With respect to parking duration, on-street parking exhibited approximately 80% of vehicles parking for less than 1 hour, which again is what you would expect for that type of facility. And for the municipal town lots, more than half of vehicles parked for greater than 1 hour. Factoring in the impacts of COVID, if COVID restrictions are reduced and we see an increase in demand for parking in the downtown Fawn Hill area, as well as future growth in demand due to population growth and development in Fawn Hill, we could see the parking utilization increase to approximately 60%. Therefore, based on the findings of our field surveys and our analysis of the data, we found that the current parking supply is sufficient for the next 10 years. We also undertook a review of the Meridian Community Center. One part of this was looking at the parking demand during the vaccine clinics. In reviewing the data we collected during the vaccine clinics, we found that the demand actually exceeded the capacity. It was quite busy in the lot with vehicles circulating or parking in non-designated areas. We also undertook surveys on a Saturday with programmed sporting events and other activities and events going on. During the Saturday surveys, the observed peak parking demand was seen to reach approximately 70%. However, based on a review of historical attendance data for the Meridian Center, we found that attendance was actually notably lower than what was recorded during the Saturday in which the surveys were completed. So post-COVID, we actually estimate, based on our review of historical data for typical attendance, post-COVID, we could see utilization of the parking lot reaching 90%. So essentially nearing capacity on a typical pre or post-COVID situation. Now, this doesn't include a tournament. So if a tournament were to occur, we could see a notable uptick in demand for parking, and the parking utilization could be in the realm of 120 and 135%, essentially exceeding the current capacity of the parking lot. Now, when you consider future growth in demand over the next 10 years, the demand, utilization could increase even further. And this also does not factor in that an additional 10% reserve capacity would be something that's desirable. So all in all, we estimate that approximately 125 to 170 spaces would be beneficial at the Meridian Community Center and would be sufficient to provide that additional needed capacity for a 10-year horizon. We also undertook a review of the town's parking standards and compared them to 11 other municipalities within Niagara region. With respect to common commercial uses applicable to these study areas, such as dine-in restaurants, retail, and office uses, as well as common residential uses such as apartments, single-family detached, and townhouse uses, we found that the town's minimum parking requirements for these uses were fairly consistent with what other municipalities in the region are providing. The town does have a maximum parking requirement for dine-in restaurants, retails, and office uses, specifically within the East Font Hill mixed-use zone. And this is something we think is desirable and should be maintained, especially given there is a surplus parking availability. The town is also one of 3 municipalities to provide a minimum parking requirement specific to senior apartment houses. That rate is 1 space per unit, and we also think that is something that should be maintained. And lastly, most municipalities within Niagara region have a requirement of 1 space per residential secondary suite. The town currently does not have a minimum parking requirement specific to residential secondary suites, and we recommend the town consider adopting such a rate. And for the next few slides, I'm going to go over some of the key preliminary recommendations from our study. So for the Fenwick area, we recommend an improvement to the municipal lot parking signs. This will help improve the overall parking efficiency of the Fenwick area, helping visitors to the Fenwick area relocate that municipal lot that is essentially back of house or behind that downtown core, as well as investigate opportunities to urbanize an additional portion of Maple Street, which could formalize additional on-street parking spaces. So as I discussed earlier in the presentation, at the 10-year horizon, Fenwick could experience a parking demand during peak periods that may be nearing capacity, and an extension of the urban cross-section on Maple Street further north of the municipal lot may be one solution to provide additional designated on-street parking. We also recommend a sightline assessment at the intersection of Maple Street and Camborough Road. Based on our public consultation efforts, we received some comments from the public concerning some sightline issues due to on-street parking within close proximity of that main intersection. And this is just a photo of Maple Street north of the municipal lot, looking north. And as you can see here, it's generally a rural cross-section. On-street parking is permitted, but as you can see, vehicles are typically parking on the grass, and during winter conditions or inclement weather, that the on-street parking may not be accessible or available to people. So in the future, as we get closer to that 10-year horizon, if the situation is reevaluated and it's found that additional supply is needed, this could provide an opportunity to provide some additional designated parking spaces. For Ridgeville, we recommend investigating the provision of additional designated public parking in the area. That could be in the form of a parking lot on the municipally owned water station lands, and or an extension of the on-street parking on Canberra Road westwards to provide additional parking supply there as well. In addition to those two improvements, an option would be to improve safety and accessibility for pedestrians at the intersection of Canberra Road at Effingham Street through the provision of enhanced pavement markings and AODA compliant sidewalk letdowns and tactile walking plates. So those intersection improvements could be done in conjunction with the other improvements recommended and would help facilitate pedestrians crossing between, for example, a future parking lot at the water station property and the existing retail and business establishments on the other side of Effingham Street. And these are just two photos from the Ridgeville area. The photo on the left is an image of Canberra Road looking west. This is essentially the point where the designated on-street parking terminates. So there is an opportunity to extend this urban cross section further west to provide additional on-street parking. And the photo on the east is a photo of the municipal water station property looking south. And as you can see, there may be an opportunity here to provide designated parking spaces for the public and customers of the businesses across the street, while also potentially maintaining the functionality of water truck filling station. For Fawn Hill, we recommend improving the municipal lot parking signs in the downtown Fawn Hill area. Again, this will improve the efficiency of parking in the area, helping to inform visitors to the downtown area that there is surplus parking at the back near Town Hall. We also recommend that town continue to encourage the use of non-auto transportation modes for travel to the downtown, walking, cycling, transit usage, which will help reduce the parking demand and help maintain a reserve supply of parking. We also recommend the introduction of pavement markings to delineate the on-street parking that is currently provided on Churchill. There's currently no pavement markings there, and by delineating the actual parking spaces using pavement markings, that could help increase the efficiency of the parking supply. And we also recommend a sightline assessment be undertaken at the intersection of Pelham and Churchill. Based on our consultations with the public, several comments were received concerning on-street parking in very close proximity to the intersection, potentially causing some sightline concerns. And for the Meridian Community Center, we recommend the town look into the potential of expanding the parking lot eastwards to the town-owned lands between the center and Rice Road. We also recommend an increase in the designated snow storage capacity of the site to avoid spaces being used for snow storage, therefore maximizing the supply available to users of the center. And we also recommend that the appropriate number of accessible parking spaces be maintained with any potential parking lot expansion. The image on your left here is an aerial image of the MCC Center. As you can see in the red outlined area, that is the lands where a potential parking lot expansion could occur. And the image on the right is a concept of what that potential expansion could potentially look like. And this concept illustrates an additional 200 spaces. That provides more than enough spaces to meet our projected parking demands that I had talked about earlier in the presentation. And lastly, to wrap up, we also looked at various other town-wide recommendations that may help improve the parking situation overall across the town. These are detailed more and described in the report, but just to pick out a few in the name of time. The first one, we recommend a post-COVID parking survey be conducted. A parking survey can be done quickly and efficiently, and by doing it post-COVID, for example, this summer, or potentially even better next summer. Most of the impacts of COVID restrictions would have subsided, and you may get a better read on some of the parking demand during those peak periods in these downtown areas. We also recommend that town continue to monitor parking utilization through the completion of such parking surveys on an ongoing basis, for example, every 3 to 4 years, to see how growth in parking demand is actually increasing or playing out. And we also, another key one down at the bottom of the table I'd like to just highlight is the introduction of a minimum off-street parking requirement for residential secondary suites at 1 space per suite. As I said before, most other municipalities have such a rate like that in Niagara region, and they are currently recommending at 1 space per suite, because those secondary suites do generate an additional parking demand on the system. So by having the municipality provide a minimum parking requirement for those uses, we think that'll be beneficial to those areas in which such uses occur. Thank you for your time, and I'd like to open the floor to questions.
Okay, thank you very much for the study and for the presentation. Very much appreciated. Council, we will now take questions. Councillor Hahn.
Thank you, through the mayor. Thanks very much for the presentation. Question to the presenter. So with regards to the growth projected for the town of Pelham, what number did you use? What was your multiplier? Where did you get that number? Who supplied it? And what was the number for the next 10 years?
Yeah, so we looked at a 10-year horizon. We didn't go beyond that because we felt a 10-year horizon was reasonable. And as I said near the end of the presentation, follow-up parking surveys could be done to see how parking demand is trending over the next few years as COVID subsides. With respect to the downtown areas of Fenwick, Ridgeville, and Font Hill, we looked at a few things. So first was background studies that we've looked at that have shown that general traffic demand in the GTA and Southern Ontario has exhibited reductions in traffic demand in the realm of 20 to 30% during the COVID restrictions during this period. So we looked at a conservative rate. Let me just pull up the slide. I think it was 20% to account for that. With respect to the Meridian Community Center, and with respect to the growth rate for growing those areas off to the 10-year horizon, we looked at the low growth and high growth scenarios. So when we looked at Statistics Canada, population trends, and we had some other sources we looked at, growth rates generally ranged between the 1 to 2% per year growth. So when we look at that over a 10-year horizon, we thought, well, why don't we look at the lower end and the higher end at about a 10% and a 20% scenario to see the varying impacts those scenarios had. For the Meridian Community Center, with respect to a growth rate, we adopted a 10% growth rate. Growth at the Meridian Community Center would behave somewhat differently than some of the other areas because the demand at the center is more constrained by the facilities being offered and the scheduling and the capacity of the center itself. But nonetheless, we applied a 10% growth over the 10-year horizon.
So are you aware that the region actually projected growth rates for all the municipalities in Niagara? I think it was, I'm going to say 6 to 8 months ago. And perhaps our director of planning can speak to that. Did you not use any of that information? Because we have pretty hefty growth rates headed our way in the next while. And they projected those and provided those. So did you not use any of that information, or were you not supplied that information?
The other part Adam didn't mention is we also did collect information on development and redevelopment proposals within the different areas to see what was already in the queue in terms of redevelopment plans. To answer your question, we didn't specifically use the growth rates because we're trying to generate an increase in parking demand, so it won't be a one-to-one. What we did look at is trying to develop kind of an envelope, as Adam says, a high and a low. Because at this point, this wasn't the ideal time to undertake a parking study just because of the downturn and the closures and restrictions. So we're trying to layer on the adjustment for the reduction in travel and visitation to everything from, a town hall to restaurants. So we applied a correction there, and then the reason we only did the 10 to 20% is we didn't want to overstate the situation. And that's why one of our key recommendations is, as the COVID restrictions are generally lifted now, masking has come down, we're seeing an increased confidence around the restaurants and others. We think that the work done is solid, but that benchmark that you're starting with, that we would have loved to have completed the study before COVID had kicked in, we don't want to layer too many estimates on top of each other to create what I think would be an overstatement. So I don't know if I've truly answered the question. We looked at the allocations, but we also looked at what was coming, and that 10-year horizon is kind of muted because it's going to take a little bit of time for things to pick up back to post-COVID. I don't think we're going to see that in 2022. It may take to 23 or 24 before we recover what we've lost in terms of travel, and with travel, the parking, the big part. If you think about work, the future of the home-based work or partial home-based work is creating that uncertainty. So I'm kind of going in circles a little bit here, but we were just concerned with some of those estimates being very high, and we didn't think that we could layer them on top of each other and sit here and say that that was really achievable within the next 10 years, because we think the first 3 or 4 may be a recovery and an adjustment to the new way that people work and travel and shop.
Okay. I think that it's arguably we're one of the areas, I think, in Niagara region that all of Niagara region is going to see a big boom. We're already seeing it, but even more so. And Niagara region has provided that information. I think that's very important to consider. That's central, I think, to this. And the more houses that are built here, the more homes, whatever they be, whether they're apartments or what have you. We're not dealing with 1987 anymore, where the numbers we currently have, it was quite normal for a household to have 1 vehicle per home in 1987. We're not in 1987 anymore. So 2 and 3 vehicles per home. Those vehicles are going to be parked somewhere, and it's not always on the driveway. And when they travel, there's more going to restaurants and parking on the sides of the streets. Things like, and I hope you've considered things like, in a normal situation, we have the market, which takes up our municipal parking downtown. Can't park when there's a market, obviously, so then where are you going to park? When we have our concert series, again, parking situation. We didn't have that, of course, during COVID, but I think most people, if you ask them, they'd say, yes, it's tricky to find parking. We're hoping to grow MCC with regards to concerts and things and different events that will be taking place at the MCC. Again, parking issues, more tournaments, parking issues. I'm sure you couldn't help but notice the numerous buildings being built in and around the MCC. Single family homes, large apartment buildings, and that's just the start. There's many more to come. So have you had fulsome discussions with the planning department to really map out where these apartment buildings are going? What's slated for the next 10 years? Hopefully that's all been discussions that you've had, because even if you look at East Fenwick, there's development going to be there as well, and downtown as well. So it just seems like as far as your numbers, I think that they're very modest, but I really would have liked to see you use at least the numbers that the region has provided, because I think they're a little bit more on track. We're seeing major growth here. Is your location, are you out of Toronto by chance, or where are you out of?
No, we're out of St. Catharines.
Oh, okay.
No, we're very familiar. Yeah, I guess the growth and the increase in car ownership, all of that we're aware of that. I guess it's when we're talking about parking and that translating to a demand on parking, the numbers are not going to be exactly the same. And that's kind of where I was going, is we step back from those projections, because not every additional car, not every additional person is going to generate a parking demand, because we are seeing a bit of a shift in how people shop, how people eat out or order food in, and where people work, whether they go to work every day or they're working part-time. So that's what I'm saying, over the next couple of years, we'll get a real sense of what some of these trends that have developed over COVID stick and which ones we kind of revert back to. So that's why we're saying, as we layered the different growth rates within the residential areas, I think we had 20%, within Fenwick, Ridgeville, and East Vaughan Hill, we had 20% for COVID, and then another 20% in the high growth scenario, so a total of 40% growth. So I just want to make, so we're layering this on. So our high growth estimate was 40%, the low growth was 30%. So that is still a substantial growth. It's not very low, but as I said, not every auto trip will generate, or not every car ownership will generate necessarily a parking demand in these unique areas. At the Meridian Center, we did look at those special events and tournaments and things of that nature to see, as a stress test, what would happen if you had to accommodate those. The downtown market, we know what the stress test for that is. It is a large number, and the question there is, do you manage that by using facilities like the Meridian Center or the schools, and taking these parking areas that are already built and using them, as opposed to building an extra, like instead of designing for the worst case, have a good supply there and then leverage these other spaces that wouldn't be utilized during those events to reduce the consumption of land for hardscape. So yeah, our numbers are not low. My concern is not every auto will generate a parking trip in these unique areas throughout your community. And that's where, when we talked about secondary units, we know housing is a big concern right now in Niagara, the affordable housing. A lot of people are using their properties for secondary units. So ensuring that there's adequate supply and consideration, that's where that recommendation came from in our study. So the short answer, or the long answer to your short question, is yes, we did consider that information, and we sized it appropriately to what we felt would translate to parking demand from that growth. And we did talk with planning. We did look at the planned developments that were in the pipeline for the next 10 years. And again, what they were providing on site, we were not looking at what they provide on site. It would be the spillover that would have to be addressed by the town through public parking, is what we've accommodated.
Right. So if you, for instance, you take, just off the top of my head, you're looking at 3 very large buildings, very close, if not at the intersection of 20 Highway and Pelham. Okay. There's one already up. There's another one to come up, and potentially another one, the Butcher and Banker building. So 3, whether 4 or 5, what have you, stories, right? Very large buildings. And because we're dealing with 1987 numbers, their requisite is only to have 1 stall per unit. So if they have company, they might have 4 or 5 parking stalls for visitors. If they have company, or whether it's a holiday or whatever, it seems as though the answer then is, we'll just use street parking. Well, what happens with other people that are using street parking for the restaurants or other things that are downtown, right? So there's clearly going to be a shortage when the developers don't have to provide more than 1 unit per dwelling unit, one parking stall per dwelling unit. And then the overflow goes out to the street. The street, then the answer is, we'll use the municipal parking lot. What if there's a market there or a concert series there? So where do people park? We don't have any more municipal lots to say, we're going to make this a big parking lot now. That the land's used, it's gone, it's sold. So this is why it's kind of troubling for me. And I guess earlier on I asked about Ms. Weens, if you could provide the number that the region has projected for growth.
Ms. Weens?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, through you. Pelham is projected to grow. The region has done their growth projections to 2051. And so we're projected to grow by about another 9,000 people. That's the entire town of Pelham that will grow by that amount by that time. And, I think as Mr. Palumba indicated, what we're looking at here is the demand on the parking versus the population growth. They are two kind of different and distinct things because you'll have people coming to your community to use your restaurants and your shops that may or may not live here, and you're attracting, people from outside to come, and they're the ones who come and park. So that's kind of it. It is related. There is a population factor in the growth, but it isn't the only factor in terms of the parking demand. And so by the projection of the demand at a low growth at 10%, and then a high growth at 20% is definitely in line with those population growth projections as well.
Councillor?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Olson? Councillor, it's that time of night when I say you're muted.
I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor. I put my phone on mute because I was getting phone calls, believe it or not. So sorry about that. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the presenters. You mentioned that I believe you said 15 spots were needed in Ridgeville. Is that the right number?
Yeah, just over approximately a doubling of what's currently there. So Ridgeville has 12 designated on-street spots, and we recommend approximately 15 be provided to meet the projections for the 10-year horizon.
Okay, and how many do you think that the water point would provide? Do you have any idea of that?
We've only had a quick look at the water property because there wasn't really a solid survey. So just from visiting it on site, in between the driveway and Cambro, you could probably get close to 6 or 8 in there. But there could be some reconfiguring. That's a very wide driveway, a very wide asphalt roadway that's in there. I think if the town was going to invest in creating some spots there, it would be good to take a look at the way it's currently configured, the way the trucks come in, and only provide the trucks for what they need. And I think you'd be able to get more. I'm hoping 10 to 12. Because in behind the pump station, there's also land, but it's all green right now. Can you clear that area? Those are things you would look at. I think you could probably get all 15 on there if you could clear everything. But as we said, there is also opportunity to get a few more spaces on Cambro, extending that nice urban cross section you had a little further west along Cambro there.
Okay, I think you're probably right. 6 to 8 is probably the number from the existing layout there, and I believe we own the building. Mr. Mark, could you tell us if we own that building there, the storage building as well?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, the town owns that property, or the water station and the building, that storage building sit on.
Okay, and does the water stop always have to stay in the same place there, or same location? I'm a little reluctant to see large vehicles around small vehicles in that manner for safety reasons, and and people walking and pedestrians walking through a parking lot. That's
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that obviously the location of the water filling station could change. Just take the required infrastructure investment to do that.
okay. And I understand also that the back part of the store there is with the black gravel on it behind that's owned by the store owner there. I think, is that correct? Right behind Bob's there, Bob's store.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, yeah, that's not town-owned property.
And is the fire chief still on the line?
No, he isn't.
Oh, is that a stop for water for the fire department as well?
Jason, Mr. Marr, would you know that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I don't have that answer readily available.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Well, it has to be pointed out that the residents, as the people who have taken the study, they have indeed appeared before council twice, asking council to increase the parking there because, again, during the summer months, they do get very busy, and so yeah, that's one thing that when I see what your recommendation is for Ridgeville, it tends to make me believe that your other parts, Fenwick and Fond Hill, must be pretty well on the mark, because you definitely hit the mark on Ridgeville. That we've had the store owners here telling us that they had no parking, they needed parking, and hopefully we will, now that finances are getting better, hopefully we can address that need for sure. So thank you for that. Councillor Stewart, I believe you're next.
Yes, thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. The first comment I'd like to make is that we, as a town, cannot reasonably expect people coming to a town event or using town facilities to use parking that's owned and provided by other churches and schools and businesses. The schools and the churches have insurance to pay, and they shouldn't have to be responsible for the vehicles that we're sending there. And for example, there's an event going on at the community center this weekend, and one of the people involved with organizing the event suggested that if it was tight for parking, to park over at Food Basics. Now that's totally unacceptable, because when you look at the rate that the stores in that plaza pay to be there, we should not be encouraging people to clog up their parking. So that's my first point. The second point is, where is it? The parking for residential. This council all knew, probably before we were councillors, because it's something that most of us wanted to address. We knew that there was a shortfall in the residential parking. And as far as 2 parking spaces for a residential unit, that's not enough. We're dealing with, it's going to be more and more secondary units, which will have to provide an extra off-street parking space. And we're also dealing with multi-generational families. We're in a very tight economic time, and there are so many young adults who've had to move back and move in with their parents in order to save to purchase a home of their own. So instead of having 2 cars, which have to juggle for position in a driveway according to who has to leave for work first, so we'll be dealing with those same 2 spots with potentially 3 or 4 workers having to park. There's, you know, I know that you've done your due diligence, but there are so many unaddressed issues in this. I'm not comfortable with it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. One of the presenters, would you have comments on that?
Thank you, Mayor, through you to the councillor. The comments related to the change in households and that, absolutely. Within these core areas that we looked at, and in specific with the parking study, the majority of the parking study was done on the provision and of determining what the adequacy of the public supply was to support the areas of Fenwick, Ridgeville, Fond Hill, and then specifically the MCC facility. So that broader issue of what's happening within our residential community, the multi-generational families, the the secondary units. That's we're in full agreement with that, and that's why we were looking at the concept and the recommendation of considering those secondary units for additional parking supply requirement and putting that forward to the town for consideration to update their parking bylaw. In terms of the adequacy within your residential areas throughout your town, I do have to say that's not something that we did look at within the scope of this study. So I don't really have a strong comment on that. The use, though, of the other parking areas for schools and that, I just want to clarify what we were saying there. If there are special events, things that happen once or twice a year that create a large load, parking load on your system, you have two approaches. One is you design for the peak of the peak, which means you've got a lot of additional parking sitting there for a significant part of the year, or the other one is you design for an occurrence that happens on a more regular basis, and under those very special events you put special parking plans in place and event management in place to try to bring people into the area, shuttle them, or have them walk to where they're going but park elsewhere. That was a strategy we had used, and we had heard that was being used in Pelham and fairly successful with some of the special events that had happened.
Okay.
So I just want to be clear, we are planning and recommending Pelham plan to have the appropriate supply, but under those very special events where you need significantly more parking to manage visitation, and that's where we're saying if you can reuse parking that is sitting empty in the off-peak hours because school is closed in the evenings or on weekends, it would seem to be the more viable, cost-effective, environmentally friendly way to address that unique parking demand.
Excellent, thank you. And just before I go to anyone, is it safe to say that no one builds for the peak? I mean, it doesn't seem much. You would have such a waste of space. You would have all this black tarmac draining water. It wouldn't be environmentally safe. So I guess the question is, does anybody build for the peak? Because I already know what the answer is, but I'd like to hear it.
So
I'm sorry, Nick, either one of you?
Oh, yeah, no, absolutely. Generally, no, you don't design for the peak. Like even in parking, the numbers that Adam was running through is we like to have some reserve. We suggested this 10% reserve, but that's out of a typical peak. I've done very large studies for even like private industry, like hotels and that. Hotels do not design for the peak of the peak because, again, it is kind of it's financial, but it's also, again, environmentally, you have all this paved area that for a good portion of the year is sitting unused. So with municipalities, generally with parking studies, we try to identify what that design is. We target that. And these special events, if you didn't have facilities within reasonable proximity to the downtown, like the schools and that, where you can do, shuttle bus or park and rides, things like that, would be a different story. But Pelham does have those facilities close by, and it would seem the more appropriate way for Pelham. That's our recommendation to you. Obviously, you can look at things differently, but you would have these larger areas sitting unoccupied for a significant part of the year. And as our downtown survey had shown, I think you do currently have surplus parking there on typical days, and around these special days, obviously there are pressures, and the concert series, things like that, all push that to the limit.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. Councillor Wink.
Yes, thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, just a couple of comments, and then I'll ask a question or two. We do have a secondary suite bylaw in town that does require one parking off street. So I'm not sure if maybe that was presented to you before this secondary unit bylaw got put through, but that was put through within the last 4 or 5 months. So it is there. Secondly, before that, thank you for your report, and I agree with most of your findings. I think there was a missed opportunity here. It's unfortunate that the Joint Accessibility Committee and the Senior Advisory Committee weren't consulted with respect to this, particularly around the MCC, but also, did you use a filter to look at accessible parking in Fenwick, Ridgeville, and Font Hill? If not, I think that was a missed opportunity. So if you could answer that question first, please.
Gentlemen?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So 2 parts. Yes, we weren't advised that the one space additional secondary unit had been put in place. So yeah, our information predated that. As far as the accessibility filter, no, we did not. But our report is in draft. If what comes from today's meeting is that there are a few things that you would like reviewed and included, we can definitely accommodate those.
Yeah, I know from my perspective and from perspective of the senior community and the joint accessibility, do we have enough designated handicap, wrong word, accessibility spots in our town parking? And also with respect, my next point has to do with the MCC. I'd like to get your sense on how many accessible parking spaces we require. Right now it's 4. I believe we've got 4 spaces there. If I look at the Sobeys Plaza and the LCBO, probably a smaller parking lot, but they've got 9 accessible parking in addition to some for young mothers and their kids. So I'd just like to get a sense on what type of expectation should we have for the MCC as far as accessible parking.
I do apologize. I don't have in front of me what the accessible rate would be. But part of the recommendations, we very much picked up on the fact that as you consider parking expansions for the MCC, that we revisit the accessible parking supply and the location of those to make sure that we are, that you're meeting the requirements, but also, as I said, we're happy to meet and have a discussion on this accessibility and to determine whether there is a significant deficiency or whether other types of parking may be needed. Like you said, what you'll see in most of the commercial plazas now is a series of different types of specialty parking. We've talked about providing parking in the downtown for if you have businesses that are going to offer carpool or things like that, provide them priority spaces where they can gain a benefit from providing those types of travel demand management tools. But I apologize, I don't have the rate. I'm not sure if the Director of Planning knows offhand what the parking requirement is for the MCC, sorry.
Ms. Weens, would you have that figure close to your hand?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. So I believe the 4 parking spots that we do have at the MCC for accessible parking meet the requirements under the AODA for accessible parking for a parking lot that size. That's my understanding.
Okay, thank you very much. Councilor Wink?
No, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Corr.
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you very much for the presentation. Did anyone look at the Summerside Boulevard, which is a roadway that's in between the downtown core and the MCC? And for me, having green grass in the middle, that could be used for parking, or tearing that out and using one side for parking. Have we looked at that?
I don't imagine the parking study people did. Did you look at an alternative like that in your study, or were you looking at more conventional ways? But let me first go to as Director of Planning, Ms. Weens.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So that was not in the terms of reference or the scope of work for the consultants. The scope of work was really focused on the downtown areas of Fonthill, Fenwick, and Ridgeville, and the Meridian Community Center in terms of parking, and then a review of the parking standards that were in our zoning bylaw to compare that with other municipalities to see whether or not our parking requirements were consistent with what other municipalities require with respect to parking. And then to develop, strategies for parking management and parking supply in those, specifically those 4 areas being downtown Fonthill, Fenwick, Ridgeville, and the Meridian Community Center. So looking at the Summersides Boulevard was not within the scope of this study. Summersides Boulevard in the East Fonthill secondary plan is known as designated as a ceremonial roadway with a center median. So it was built and constructed to be consistent with the vision for the East Fonthill secondary plan.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Weens. Councillor?
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir. And Councillor Stewart? Oh, I'm sorry. Councillor Stewart, you've already spoke. Can I go to Councillor Hildebrand first?
Yeah, sure
Okay.
you can.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hildebrand?
Yes, thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you very much for the presentation. And I understand your study was done during COVID, and I understand that makes a huge difference. Let me just make some general comments from my observations. Prior to COVID, I attended many events at the MCC when there were large events where councillors and everyone else goes. Just about every time we had one of those events, I was parked in the muddy field with my car on the dirt, just like the contractors are now. So obviously, when you get a special event, like we got a special event coming up this weekend. You got the home show, you got basketball tournament. You probably could have some other things going. I'm sure people will be parking on the dirt. I'm convinced. I am going to go and visit there as a just resident, not as a councillor. But I'm sure I'm going to be parking on the dirt, and I agree with my other councillor that said I saw the recommendation from the organization to park in not paid parking, but other people's paid parking lots. And I certainly don't agree with that kind of direction by an organization to take care of parking issues. So that being said, you basically said we're consistent with our peers. Basically, a lot of them are 50-50, like for parking spaces, 6 of them have 1 space and 6 have more than 1 space. So half a dozen one, half a dozen the other way. But I think our community is a bedroom community, and therefore everyone has at least 2 cars in the driveway, and possibly more. So I think I'm not comfortable with those answers. With regards to Ridgeville, I agree with my fellow councillors, and the question I have is for a public works director. We do have a garage sitting in that water fill station. Isn't that garage available to be torn down to put that area into parking?
To the Director of Planning or Director of Public Works?
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. So that building is used for storage. It does store some of recreation and wellness equipment and materials, as well as some public works materials. Again, Obviously, another option would be to dispose of that building and turn it into parking, but you'd have to find another place to store those materials.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Counselor?
Yeah, continuing on, you know, we've talked about the MCC, but the other area haven't really talked an awful lot about is Fenwick and the effect of all the events that occur in Centennial Park and related areas. Even now, before COVID, when you went to some of the restaurants in town, all those facilities depend on public parking. And I'm telling you, it's tough on a Saturday to try to find a parking spot. Like you say, there are people parking at Clarence's garage and all over the place, but really a lot of those establishments have no parking. So they depend on public parking. So I think we're underestimating the number of parking spots we really require. I know you didn't address Centennial Park, but that's another area where parking, I think, is going to be an issue. And I know that's probably not in your study and it wasn't listed, but the thing is, Centennial Park is going to get a splash pad, you're going to get 6 courts, we're going to get paddleball courts, and then we have the soccer fields and the baseball courts. Man alive, I'm not sure where all the people are going to park when all those events are going. It just seems a different situation. I like your recommendation with regards to bicycle parking. I've seen other municipalities adopt that recommendation. They've actually included that in their parking. So I think bicycle parking with a new vision for 2030 is one of those things we should be adapting. The other thing I'd like to comment on is seniors apartment parking. I know that you say we got 1 space per residence. One of the other unique solutions I've seen is the fact that they've provided a quarter of a space per bed, per room, or per unit, whichever is graded, and then 1 space per employee. Because I know these homes have a lot of employees, and I think that may give you a number greater than the 1 space you have per unit. So in general, those are my comments, but I also agree with all my other councillors that have voiced their opinion on different matters. I think they're all appropriate and need to be addressed. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Hildebrand. And now back to you, Councillor Stewart.
Yes, thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. I'm not quite sure how to phrase this to keep it politically correct, but as I stated earlier, that council knew that we had shortages of parking in the commercial areas and the MCC, and it was my understanding that the main focus that council wanted for this study was for residential purposes. As Councillor Hahn stated, all of this is based on 1987 data when, you know, most homes had 1 car, and things have changed so much in that time. And I'm sad to see that that was not one of the main focuses of the study. And the other comment that I wanted to make was, you know, about the more and more blacktop. I'm not sure now how many times I've suggested this, but as we move forward with parking, there are many options available for permeable parking spaces. So it doesn't have to be flat top that does not accept water and have to go into a storm management pond. There are better ways, more efficient ways to deal with this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other comments on the report? If I could just make some, or one anyway, it was interesting that when you did compare us to our neighbors, the other municipalities, correct me if I'm wrong, we were within their, they were within our bar park, or we were within theirs. Is that correct? Like, is it 1.4? And that's what they are also at? I forget the exact number. If you could help me out there.
Sorry, 1.4 for what?
Per resident, single-family dwellings.
Oh, single family. My understanding is the rate is 1.0 for single-family residents.
Okay, and that's the standard with throughout the region.
Well, there's several municipalities that have 1.0, and several, about 3 or 4 other municipalities that have 2, Another municipality has 1.5. Thorold has 2. Town of Lincoln 2. Town of Niagara on the Lake 2.
Okay. Okay, thank you for that. Thanks. Councilor Olson.
As through you, Mr. Mayor, it appears to me that we have these the 4 studies, but there is definitely a front runner, and that's the shops at Ridgeville. I wonder if we could ask for a report on at least 3 or 4 possibilities for what could happen there, including removal of the shed, using basically the exact where the green space that we have, leave the shed, move the water, remove the shed, see how many places we could create out of that, because it looks to me like that has the greatest opportunity cost for our community and the best we could do for what's really a unique part of our town. So how would that go, Mr. Cripps? What would that look like?
Mr.
That
CAO.
is, certainly a reasonable request based on this study, some specific advice and specific potential action items. Come back with, I mean, they'd be rough cost estimates, but those, and then options for council to include in future capital budgets, or if they're small enough items, in current operating budgets, depending what those options are. So if council is wondering, you now have this document that identifies parking challenges in a number of parts of the town, and that's a full basis for policy adjustments and for investigations of options. And so we'd be happy to receive any direction, anywhere specific you'd like us to focus, and reasonable timeframes, hopefully.
Okay, thank you for that. Now, as council is aware, this is a draft that came before us tonight. If there were, and already Councillor Wink has brought up the Joint Accessibility Committee, and perhaps the 2 presenters could take a look at that part of the parking. Is there specifically, knowing what the terms of reference are, is there any other specific items that this council would like the studiers to go back and take another look at? Is there any specific item, or however? Councillor Hahn.
Yes, thank you. As I started off, I think with the first of the questions, and that was, I think there should be a keen eye on the projected growth that's already been provided to us from the region. Using those, that information. So the region no doubt spent several dollars of taxpayers' money to have that study done. Perhaps we should use that information and use that in our study. Okay,
thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hildebrand.
Through you, like Councillor Stewart mentioned, through you, Mr. Mayor, the fact that we were sure the study would address residential development because of all the development in the subdivisions. And the fact is, that number we have for parking, we've noted over and over again in our council meetings that that number was not acceptable. So that definitely has to be addressed.
Well, then I suggest, go Director of Planning, then you will have to redefine their what's the term, terms of reference, because they were not to look at the residential parking in this study. Am I right, Madame of Planning, Ms. Weens?
Mr. Mayor, through you, what the terms of reference indicated that we asked that the consultants provide a comparison of other municipalities for residential, commercial parking requirements. So they have included that summary table in their study of what other municipalities require for parking for residential uses, including a single detached, a townhouse, and apartment house dwellings. We can use that information and incorporate it in the new zoning bylaw. So that was the intent, was that we would understand whether or not our current parking standards in our zoning bylaw were appropriate or not. If there is something different that council wishes to have, then it would require, some other type of analysis. But that was the analysis that was in the terms of reference for this study to help inform, parking requirements for the new zoning bylaw.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hahn, you had your hand up again?
I did, thank you. I just want to ensure that any new development, so from the time that you would have probably initiated the study, which I think was, dare I say, over a year ago, and then kind of the whole COVID continued on, at that point in time, you were probably given guidance that, there were a certain number of developments in the hopper. Today, that number has no doubt increased substantially. So when you're going to go back and you're going to look at these numbers, please look at the most current numbers that we have in the developments that have been proposed and such, because certainly there's a lot more multiple dwelling units that are in the works or will be before too long, and as well as just the additional subdivisions, i.e. one we're going to be talking about later this evening even, right, the Forest Park. So there's a lot more subdivisions, that are coming down the pipe in the next 5 and 10 years. So please just use as much of that accurate information as possible. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Councillor. Is there anyone, going back to Councillor Olson's point about the Ridgeville parking? We know that there is multiple items that could be looked at, and we need a staff direction. Do we need can that just be a staff direction, Mr. CAO, and leave it at that, or should that be a motion? Sir.
Well, so we're sort of going in two directions here. At the moment, this is really just an opportunity to ask questions of clarification to the authors of the study. We set a budget of $30,000, and for $30,000, we got very detailed analysis of parking in Fenwick, shops of Ridgeville, Font Hill, and the MCC, 4 areas, and then we got some survey comparison analysis of ourselves vis-a-vis our municipal comparators, i.e. other places in Niagara, with respect to residential and commercial parking. So that's the work we got within that budget envelope. And I just want to, so we actually this is a very large volume of work, and it has supported many of council's clearly the goals, which are to enhance parking opportunities across the town. So we do have the ammunition now. I would encourage us to ask any other questions of clarification. The document remains in draft, but a lot of the things we're talking about, like dramatically expanding the scope into new areas, which is sort of difficult for the authors of the report. Beyond that exercise, when you're satisfied that we've asked clarification questions or pointed out areas where maybe the report needs to be slightly enhanced, then I think we want to have a discussion of our next steps. So we'll get that final version of the report in due course, whatever due course happens to be. And in the interim, we now have some ammunition, some stuff to work with, and what would you like staff to focus on? And what sort of timelines would you like? Would you like them as separate reports, as an omnibus report? There were a couple different ways to proceed.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. So let's first of all finish up with the draft report. Councillor Wink wanted the joint accessibility. Councillor Hahn wanted to take a look at, but wait, are we not, if we go down the road that Councillor Hahn wants us to, and help me out here, Ms. Weens, that wasn't part of the original study in your viewpoint about going into residential parking, or what's your take on this?
So, Mr. Mayor, through you, the consultants have looked at parking requirements for residential uses in other municipalities and compared them to our requirements. And, they're not that far out of line. And, it will help us inform kind of where we need to make adjustments in the new zoning bylaw. So we will do that regardless, because the zoning bylaw is in draft, and we can incorporate these, any recommendations in the new zoning bylaw. With respect to Councillor Hahn's growth and her concerns related to the amount of growth that's occurring, this is certainly information that the consultants, had. We did provide with them and shared with them the, kind of plan development within these studies areas. And then they have also looked at, a low growth and a high growth scenario. So what we'll do is just circle back to those and compare that to the population growth and make sure that that is captured in their high growth numbers, which the consultants are confident that they did capture that, but we'll confirm that.
Okay, excellent. Okay, thank you for that. So in your estimation, then, that part of the study, perhaps a little bit tweaking on the high end would be sufficient then?
Yeah.
Can we
Yeah, we
confirm?
may just need to add a paragraph in there to describe that.
Okay, reconfirming the numbers. Okay, thank you. Any other, knowing what the terms of reference are, any other comments to the presenters? Okay, not seeing any. Madam Clerk?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, thank you. This is with respect to the delegation. I do have a motion put forth by Councillor Kaur, seconded by Councillor Olson. Be it resolved that council receive the delegation from RV Anderson Associates with respect to the Town of Pelham parking strategy for information. To you, Mr. Mayor, for any other discussion.
Okay, one last time, any other discussion on the study? Not seeing any. And just before we take the vote, gentlemen, thank you again for doing this study for council and making your presentation here tonight. Thank you.
It's our pleasure. Thank you.
Sorry, Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The vote begins with Councillor Stewart.
Yes.
Councillor Wink.
Yes.
Councillor Hahn.
Yes.
Councillor Hildebrandt.
Yes.
Councillor Kaur.
Yes.
Councillor Olson.
Yes.
Mayor Junkin.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That does carry. That does bring you to your next item on the agenda. And we did reorder the agenda at the beginning of council, so you are considering the Town of Pelham Parking Strategy Report submitted by the Planning Department. And I do have a motion put forth by Councillor Hahn, seconded by Councillor Hildebrandt. Be it resolved that council receive report 2022-0081 Town of Pelham Parking Strategy Report for information, and that council approve the findings of the Pelham Parking Strategy report prepared by RV Anderson Associates Limited. To you, Mr. Mayor, for discussion.
Okay, thank you. Any other discussion? I see Councillor Hahn.
Yes, thank you. So the motion, of course, to accept it, that's fine, but we've all spent tonight bringing up a lot of different ideas, and you're going to go back, because it's a draft, and you're going to go back to the drawing board and make some amendments to that. So how can we then accept the current state, because it's a draft? So really, shouldn't we just be accepting it for information?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, if I may, if council wishes, they can strike paragraph, a motion could be put forward to strike paragraph 2 and simply just accept the report for information if that is council's preference.
Okay, is the rest of council, Council Court?
I'll put that motion forward.
Okay, thank you. Seconder? Councilor Hildebrandt?
It was my motion.
Whoa.
Yep, oh, yeah.
I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor, I'm looking to you to know who the mover and the seconder is for certain.
Okay, but Councilor Hahn, was that your motion or?
Yeah, that
Correct
was
me.
my motion, and Councillor Kaur is seconding it.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Councilor Hildebrandt.
Thank you. I've readjusted that. So the amendment is to strike paragraph 2. The mover is Councillor Hahn. Seconder is Councillor Kaur. And for this vote, I would begin with Councillor Hahn.
Yes.
Councillor Hildebrand.
Councillor Hildebrand has his hand up.
Oh, I apologize,
We
Mr.
should have
Mayor.
had a
Yes,
discussion on
please
that.
go forward.
Yes, go ahead, Councillor.
The discussion I'd like to have, I think the report should go back to staff, for staff to come back with recommendations as well as not approving. I think just receiving the report is not enough. I think the planning department has heard a lot of comments, and I think those need to be addressed.
Mr. CAO, would you suggest, myself, I would think that we do the planning report, and then after we get the planning report back, the staff does theirs, or how would you see this unfolding?
Yes, Your Worship, I would agree with that. We continue to confuse I think it's the best motion here is received for information purposes. That closes that off. You will get a subsequent slightly modified report from the third-party consultants.
Okay, and then at that
Separate
time.
from that,
Yeah.
you should definitely give us some direction. And then staff will be happy to comply with that. And so we will use the work product, the draft for now, and soon the final product to present you with strategies and options.
Okay, Councillor Hildebrand, is that suitable to you?
Yes, that answers my questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions on this, on the motion? Okay, not seeing any.
Thank you, Mr.
Councillor Stewart, I'm sorry. I see Councillor Stewart, you're looking. Do you have your hand up? I'm sorry.
No, I don't, Mayor.
Oh, okay, thank you. I'm sorry, Madam Clerk.
No, my apologies. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The vote begins with Councillor Hahn.
Yes.
Councillor Hildebrand.
Yes.
Councillor Kaur.
Yes.
Councillor Olson.
Yes.
Councillor Stewart.
Yes.
Councillor Wink.
Yes.
Mayor Junkin.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That does carry. That does bring you to the main motion as amended, and that is to simply receive the report for information. If I may use the same mover and sector, Councillor Hahn and Councillor Kaur, that would be appreciated.
Okay. And any discussion on the motion as amended? Not seeing any, Madam Clerk?
Thank you. And this vote begins with Councillor Hahn again.
Yes.
Councillor Hildebrand.
Yes.
Councillor Kaur.
Yes.
Councillor Olson.
Yes.
Councillor Stewart.
Yes.
Councillor Wink.
Yes.
Mayor Junkin.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and that does carry. Mr. Mayor, that does bring you to your next item on the agenda, and that is the adoption of minutes. And I do have a motion put forth by Councillor Wink, seconded by Councillor Kaur. Be it resolved that the following minutes be adopted as printed, circulated, and read. 1 RC 06/2022 regular council minutes from the meeting of March 21st, 2022. Mr. Mayor, if you could call for errors or omissions.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Any errors or omissions in the minutes mentioned by the clerk? Yes, clerk. Not seeing any, Madam Clerk? Oh, Councillor Hahn.
Thank you. Not so much an error or omission. I just wanted to inform that I won't be voting on this because I had a scheduling conflict, so I didn't attend that meeting, so I shouldn't be voting on the minutes then.
Okay, thank you for that info. Madam Clerk?
Thank you. I will note that. The vote then begins with Councillor Hildebrand.
Yes.
Councillor Kaur.
Yes.
Councillor Olson.
Yes.
Councillor Stewart.
Yes.
Councillor Wink.
Yes.
Mayor Junkin.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That does carry. And I have marked that Councillor Hahn has not voted on that matter. To you, Mr. Mayor, that brings us to the request to lift consent agenda items for separate consideration. As Council is aware, an item only requires to be lifted should Council wish to change the resolution attached. I would ask members of Council to advise the Mayor if they wish to lift any items.
Okay, thank you. Is there any items on the consent agenda that any councillor would like to lift? Not, I see Councillor Wink.
Yes, 8.4.2, please.
Okay, thank you, Councillor.
Thank you. I have that as 8.4.2, and that's the request for the noise bylaw exemption. Are there any other matters?
Yes, is there any other, I see Councillor Olson.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, 8.3.1.
Okay,
I
thank
see
you.
8.3.1, and that's the outdoor restaurant patios and parking areas. Are there any other items?
Yes. And is there any other items any councillor would like to lift? Not see it. Thank you very much, Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That brings us to our motion put forth by Councillor Stewart, seconded by Councillor Wink. Be it resolved that the consent agenda items as listed on the April 4th, 2022 council agenda be received and the recommendations therein contained be approved, save and accept items 8.4.2 and 8.3.1. Council certainly can discuss all other items on the agenda. Mr. Mayor, did you want me to list them in categories?
But the council's already said that they don't want to lift any.
Just for discussion.
Yeah, okay, yeah, go ahead. That seems to work. Thank you.
Okay, the first category for discussion would be 8.1. That's the presentation for recommendations arising from COW or PMP.
Any discussion on that? Not seeing any, Madam Clerk?
The next would be staff reports of a routine nature or information or action.
Again, any discussion on those items? Councillor Stewart?
Yes, thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. 8.3.3, our Pelham distribution system inspection. I would just like to commend our Public Works Department for a job well done with not having anything not in compliance. Thank you. Great work.
Excellent idea to bring that forward, Councillor. Thank you. It goes again to show what a great crew we have looking after the water system. As a council, we really do appreciate it. Thank you for bringing that up, Councillor Stewart. Any other questions, comments? Not seeing any, Madam Clerk?
The next one is the action correspondence for routine nature.
Okay, action correspondence of a routine nature. Not seeing any.
That would be the information correspondence items is next.
Yes, information correspondence items. Any comments, questions on those? Not seeing any, Madam Clerk?
The Niagara Region correspondence.
Yes. Any comments on the Niagara Region correspondence? And not seeing any there, Madam Clerk.
And then it would be finally two more. The regional Niagara action items.
Okay. I'm sorry, what one? Where?
The Niagara Region corresponds for action items.
Oh, I see, yeah, 8.6. Yes, regional municipality Niagara action items. Any comments on those? Not seeing any, Madam Clerk.
And the last one is the committee minutes for information.
And the last item, any comment? Not seeing any.
If there's any other discussion, would you like me to call the vote?
Any discussion on perhaps any item we may have missed? Not seeing any, Madam Clerk.
Thank you. The vote begins with Councillor Hildebrandt.
Yes.
Councillor Kaur.
Yes.
Councillor Olson.
Yes.
Councillor Stewart.
Yes.
Councillor Wink.
Yes.
Councillor Hahn.
Yes.
Mayor Junkin.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That does carry. And that will bring us to our items to be considered under separate consideration. There were two of them. The first one being the outdoor restaurant patios and parking areas. And this is a report from the Planning Department. The resolution attached is be it resolved that Council receive report 2022-0076 temporary outdoor restaurant patios and parking areas for information, and that Council permit the temporary waiving of maximum of 6 parking spaces for restaurants to allow pop-up parking lot patios in the parking area associated with restaurants for the remainder of 2022. To you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, Councillor Olson, you lifted this item. Your comments?
Yes, I did, Mr. Mayor. I wanted to point out that several of our businesses have been telling me that this is extremely important for them to have this this adjustment to the bylaw because they came through COVID and now they're up against the trying to restore themselves. There's a lot of new businesses, a lot of young business people who have and entrepreneurs who really need this kind of support. So I wanted to draw our attention to this because several of them told me they would come up to the month of March, and if they were still surviving by the end of March, they might feel free to put some more money into their business or may reinvest. And perhaps I did it the wrong way, but I wanted to make the point that this is something very important to a lot of people, a lot of businesses and entrepreneurs in our community.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. So really, you don't want to change the resolution? You just want, I see.
No, I don't want to change anything.
Okay, thank you. And I see Councillor Kaur.
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. I fully agree with Councillor Olson. I had a number of businesses saying that they just need a little bit more time. They invested a lot of money in their tents and their heaters, their tables, and their chairs. And if they could squeak out a couple extra sales because of it, they would be greatly appreciated. And again, they went through hell and they came back, and a lot of them could have closed, but they stayed around. So like Mr. Olson said, I really support this, and I think it's good for our business community.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Kaur. All good points, for sure. Any other? I see Councillor Stewart.
Again, yes. I've just got a question for our Director of Recreation on this subject. Last year, the town loaned some picnic tables to some of the restaurants, and I was wondering if that's going to be available again this year.
Councillor of Recreation, Ms. Van Ravensway.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, from what I understand, actually it's the Director of Public Works, but they do intend on loaning out the picnic tables again. Maybe Mr. Mark can comment more.
We sure will. Mr. Mark, any comments?
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, so we have inventory of tables, and we'd be more than happy to carry out that same program again this year.
Excellent. Very good. Thank you. Any other questions?
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stewart. Any other questions or comments on 8.3.1? Don't see any, Madam Clerk.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, thank you. The vote on this will begin with Councillor Hildebrandt.
Yes.
Councillor Kaur.
Yes.
Councillor Olson.
Yes.
Councillor Stewart.
Yes.
Councillor Wink.
Yes.
Councillor Hahn.
Yes.
Mayor Junkin.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That does carry. Your next item, which was lifted for consideration, is a request for noise bylaw exemption for 2 College Street, Fawn Hill. And the resolution attached is be it resolved that council receive a request for an exemption of noise bylaw number 3130/2010 as amended for information, and that council approve the noise bylaw exemption at 2 College Street, Fawn Hill on May 22nd, 2022 from 2 p.m. to 8 p.m. To you, Mr. Mayor, for discussion.
Okay, Councillor Wink, you lifted this item. Your comments, please.
Yes, so thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple of a few comments. Firstly, we've never seen this type of request being presented to this council in the past. I will make comment that in having past conversations with people in the neighborhood of College Street and Emmett Street, they're concerned with noise from the concert series and also Summerfest. I'm not sure if the neighbors would be too happy to hear that there's going to be bands in someone's backyard. That just, at least the concert series benefits all of the town. You know, this benefit is for the one particular owner. I didn't see anything in the request that he's gone to the neighbors and asked for permission. The other consideration I've got is we're bringing a band into someone's backyard. how many people are going to be there, but also what's the decibels of a band being in someone's backyard? I would think it's going to be quite loud. I would think that having a band come in is more appropriate activity to be done in a public venue that rents out space, or out in other facilities such as Lipa Park that has these types of events. So personally, I do not think that the neighbors are going to be pleased with this, and I am not going to support this.
Okay, thank you. Unfortunately, our bylaw chief isn't here tonight, maybe to
You, Mr.
shed
Mayor?
some light on it. Oh, I see, Madam Clerk.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the clerk's department is somewhat, have some knowledge of this particular request. I do understand that the bylaw department did request this resident to submit such a application for council's approval, as it is an exemption from the bylaw. I do understand that the bylaw department has requested the applicant speak to their neighbors and advise them what's going on. Now, I don't know what's come of that in particular, so I hope that does help a little bit.
Okay, thank you. So Council Wink, supposedly the applicant has reached out to his neighbors. He, as instructed to by bylaw. That's all we can say. Councillor Stewart has a.
Yes, here I am again. This has come up at least once before during our term of council. I specifically remember asking our bylaws officer if this was something that we routinely do, and he says that people ask and it's usually granted. And my other comment on this is that the exemption is only until 8 o'clock at night, so I don't think it would be that big an imposition. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that, Councillor. Any other items or information you could shed on this, Madam Clerk?
I apologize, I don't have any other information, but I did see Councillor Hahn had her hand up for a comment.
Okay, Councillor Hahn.
Yes, to the mayor. So if the clerk has some more information with regards to exactly how this request falls outside of the existing noise bylaw. So like what portion of this made it fall into an exemption?
Thank you.
Is it the time? Is it the day that it's Sunday, or what are the elements that follow?
Thank you. I do understand from the bylaw department that our current bylaw indicates that there can be no amplified music at any point of time during the day within the town of Pelham. And so since there's going to be amplified music, that is why it has come before council for their consideration.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
And Councillor Corr.
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. Does anyone know what type of event? Is it a rock and roll? Is it a wedding?
It's a birthday.
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor, it's a birthday party.
Did you hear that, Councillor Corr? It's a birthday.
Yes, I understand. And
Okay.
Is it a 4-piece band, a 2-piece band, a 10-piece band?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I don't have that information. I apologize.
Okay. Mr. CAO, are you familiar at all with this file or not?
I'm not. In fact, Councillor Wink is the one who alerted me to its very existence.
Okay.
Because he's got sharp eyes. What I might suggest is maybe you defer a decision on you ask a number of reasonable questions upon which you'd make an informed decision. And unfortunately, we don't have the appropriate staff here at the exact moment to answer your reasonable questions. Accordingly, you might consider deferring for 2 weeks, and we will make sure we answer them properly.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Wink, is that the plan of attack you would like to take?
Yes, that's fine.
Okay, thank you. Do we need a motion of deferral?
Yes, so I have on the floor that the matter be deferred until April 19th. If Councillor Wink would move that, then I would just need a seconder.
Okay, will there be a seconder for and I see Councillor Kaur.
Thank you. So the motion is to defer the matter until April 19th. If council wishes, they can further discuss.
Any further discussion on the deferral? Not seeing any. Oh, wait, Councillor Wink.
Yeah, I just want some type of assurance that the neighbors have been spoken to, and, it's not just 2 neighbors said yes and 20 neighbors were to the contrary. So someone's got to be able to keep track of who's doing the survey and who's positive and negative towards this.
So actually, you're asking for confirmation. That's all, right? Yep. Okay. Thank you, Councillor.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, thank you. The vote on this to defer the matter would start with Councillor Hahn.
Yes.
Councillor Hildebrandt.
Yes.
Councillor Kaur.
Yes.
Councillor Olson.
Yes.
Councillor Stewart. Oh, sorry, Councillor Stewart, you're muted.
Sorry, yes.
Councillor Wink.
Yes.
Mayor Junkin.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That does carry. We'll bring that back to you. To you, Mr. Mayor, that brings you to your next item of business, which is reports from members of council, and we do have a report from Councillor Olson.
Excellent. Councillor Olson, are you ready to proceed?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think the deputy clerk has my deck there.
Okay.
She certainly does. If you can give us a moment just to share the screen.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I'm here tonight and glad to be here to discuss a very important initiative that's being taking place around us. And I come as a member of this council to report and also as a director of the organization called the Niagara Peninsula Aspiring UNESCO Geopark, and give you a progress report on where we stand. But first, I'd like to read a couple of things to do with UNESCO. Peace must be founded upon dialogue and mutual understanding, and peace must be built upon the intellectual and moral solidarity of humanity. In this spirit, UNESCO develops educational tools to help people live as global citizens free of hate and intolerance. UNESCO works to ensure that every child and every citizen has access to quality education by promoting cultural heritage and equal dignity of all cultures. UNESCO strengthens the bonds between nations. UNESCO fosters scientific programs and policies as platforms for development and cooperation. UNESCO stands for the freedom of expression as a fundamental right and a key condition for democracy and development. And as a laboratory of ideas, UNESCO helps countries to adopt international standards and manage programs that foster the free flow of ideas and exchange of knowledge. It's UNESCO's duty to reaffirm the humanistic missions of education, science, and culture. And that is the background, the basis for UNESCO's involvement in developing geoparks, which I'll describe in a moment. But they're trying to develop a collective pride in our geo-heritage, our agricultural heritage, cultural heritage, including indigenous, and our cultural heritage, plus industrial. And this is meant to change some of the approaches that are taken, and then when you change an approach, you create new opportunities, and that's what the development of a geopark is. So next slide, please. Thank you, Sarah. It's basically based on our biggest geographical feature in the community, and that's Niagara Falls and the Niagara Peninsula, which I think is probably still one of the 7 wonders of the world. But it manages to combine heritage, culture, and our green culture and climate change culture in a global and educated way. Next one, please. Right now, worldwide, there are over 169 UNESCO global geoparks in 44 countries, and they attract 60 million visitors every year. And it's one big network. And this year, the Geopark, I guess it was probably a Centennial or something, was held in Korea. Next one. In Canada has certified geoparks. 2010 in Stonehammer, which is in New Brunswick. 2014's Tumbler Ridge became a geopark. Percé in Quebec became a geopark, and Bonavista Peninsula, which was just called Discovery, was named a geopark in 2020. And in 2023, Niagara Peninsula will become a UNESCO geopark and the first in Ontario. Next slide, please. The benefits of measures of success will be a better increased tourism revenue, increased visitation, increased length of stay, increased visitor spending, an increased number of the Geo Peninsula experiences, and the broad adoption of the code of practice for sustainable tourism among businesses. And it will also bring more and more understanding of the indigenous life in this area of the world, which started 10,000 years ago. And we basically arrived at this point because so many people came to the Niagara Peninsula just for the food. Thank you. Next slide. The goal is sustainable tourism, and it's also local marketing and give organizations and communities an opportunity to deal with the world in a new way. Next, please. Here's our mission. Their mission is, of course, to develop relationships with our nonprofits and our indigenous folk and our industries, especially tourism. Go ahead again, please. It's the other thing that's going to be developed over this is going to be something called the Tread Lightly brand, which will be a new brand that the Niagara Peninsula will have, based on our living here and sharing it with other people around the world. When you look at the list you go on the line to look for indigenous experiences, Niagara Peninsula Geopark will come up at the top of the list. Next, please. Consumers are really going to want to support our local businesses, and we have a photo there, I think, of that's Peninsula Ridge. We believe that there is going to be an explosion of travel and explosion of people looking for new experiences, and that we believe that they'll be coming to Niagara because of the experience in the States. And when things open up, we think this is going to be a boon for many parts of the province. And we are as Pelham is a bedroom community, will benefit from this as well. And the next one, please. We have a sustainability statement working towards sustainable tourism as Niagara, and Niagara developed in such a manner and such a scale that it remains viable indefinitely while safeguarding the Earth's life support system on which the welfare of the plant, the current and future generations depend. Next, please. These are the Sustainable Development Goals of UNESCO that are addressed by our geopark. no poverty, quality education, gender equality, decent work and economic growth, sustainable growth, I can't read that, dependable consumption, and I can't see that one, I'm sorry. Thank you, Sarah. Responsible consumption and production, climate action, and partnerships for the goals. And those are the goals that were set by UNESCO for each and every geopark to meet. Next one, please. Here's the example of what will be done in by the Global Geopark. We want to build the cairn at the Niagara Native Center, which will show draw attention to the plight of missing and murdered Indigenous women. And this will be a timeless reminder of the suffering and anguish of the victims and their families. And this will be a cairn that will be constructed probably within the next couple of years, once we achieve our accreditation. Thank you. Here's the endorsements we have to date for this project. The Niagara Region municipalities. Brock University has three professors, and they are the principal Geopark research partner. Niagara College, which is a culinary part of the organization, and they are going to develop world-class culinary school at Niagara College. We have the Niagara Peninsula Conservation Authority, the Niagara Escarpment Commission, the Chamber of Commerce, the Geopark Network. To name a few, I could go down the list here. Scotiabank, Great Wolf Lodge, Upper Canada Stone Company, Artero Wines, and many more. And there will be a discussion. There'll be announcements made on Earth Day on April 22nd about new partnerships and new Indigenous partnerships and new funding sources that we've achieved. So the other ones that we're going to be looking for is Parts Canada. So there's some of the things that we've done. We have a strategic plan which is online, and we have a budget, and we're proceeding towards a charity designation, which will happen in the fall. Next page, please. Here again is Brock, Environmental Sustainability Research Center, the Faculty of Social Sciences, and we have three Brock professors on our board. We have professors from McMaster, and we have professors who work for the not work for, but are part of the Royal Canadian Geographical Society. Next page, please. We encourage and support sustainable tourism through product creation and development. We do not create infrastructure. We are leveraging all of our partnerships, and we're not marketers. We all want Geopark marketing to be done through Niagara DMOs, which is the local district managing their marketing organizations. Next, please. Here's our strategic initiatives to build the Geopark, develop geotourism experiences across Niagara, educate residents and visitors about the geoheritage, leverage partnerships with industry and government, and strive for organizational excellence. We strive for our organizational excellence. We have well-functioning organizations, performance goals. We're meeting our budgets, accurate and timely for financial information, employee engagement, and we have a board evaluation process. Next page, please. So I want to point out, Mr. Mayor, that we submitted the final application 2 weeks ago, and we have a tour that will come through the Niagara Peninsula during the next 6 months. and we expect to be approved and available for be able to call ourselves a Geopark next year, the first in Ontario.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation, Councillor Olson. Before I turn to council, one question. I can't help but think that you have a website that people can go to for a lot of information.
Yes, thank you for mentioning that. We have our application is there, and it's online, and we've got a very good website actually.
Thank you. And one last question. I know when this was first getting off the ground, they were going to try to have a geological event in each of the municipalities. Were they able to do that? Or like Wainfleet, they were talking about the Wainfleet bog. Obviously, Lincoln would have the escarpment. You could have that in a couple of municipalities. Did they get? Were they able to designate something in each of the municipalities? And I don't mean to put you on the spot for this.
Well, they designated the short hills for Pelham.
Ah, excellent. Very good. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, any questions, comments from any members of council? Not seeing any, Councillor Olson. One last thing, obviously the tourist industry is a big supporter of this. It's always been the fault is people come down to Niagara Falls and then they go back to Toronto or wherever. This way, if they can give them another reason to spend another day, another night in the Niagara region, it's a win-win for the whole region and for the people that can enjoy the peninsula even more. Correct, sir?
That's correct. I think it's also true that it'll be a marketing tool for many of our agricultural businesses as well, because there's going to be changes in everything, and this is going to be just another way that our businesses are in the forefront, and there are people looking at new businesses, online businesses. They're looking at experiences on the farm and that type of thing, and this will give them an opportunity to we'll be first in line for that type of thing. And I think there will be a very large European uptake on the services of the community.
Excellent. Again, thank you for that, for your presentation, Councillor Olson. Look forward to the designation in 2023. Madam Clerk.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, I do have a motion put forth by Councillor Hildebrand, seconded by Councillor Wink. Be it resolved that Council receive the presentation from Councillor Olson for information. To you, Mr. Mayor, for comment.
Yep. Any other further discussions or comments? Not seeing any, Madam Clerk.
Thank you. This vote begins with Councillor Kaur.
Yes.
Councillor Olson.
Yes.
Councillor Stewart.
Yes.
Councillor Wink.
Yes.
Councillor Hahn.
Yes.
Councillor Hildebrandt.
Yes.
Mayor Junkin.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That does carry. That brings you to your first staff report on the agenda. And I do have a motion put forth by Councillor Hahn, seconded by Councillor Olson. Be it resolved that Council receive report 2022-0056 Clerk's Policy Update, Use of Corporate Resources for Election Purposes for Information, and that Council approve the revised Use of Corporate Resources Policy for Election Purposes, S201-11. To you, Mr. Mayor, for discussion.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Any comments or discussion on item 10.2.1 on the agenda? Councillor Stewart.
Yes, thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. In definitions, 3.2, it says blackout period. Certain privileges are discontinued for members of council, the mayor, and any registered candidate. I'm just wondering if these are the exemptions covered in 4.4, or is it something different?
Sorry, through you, Mr. Mayor, if I can just have a moment to open up the actual policy itself and look at 4.4. One moment, my computer is taking a little bit of time. I do know, it hasn't popped up on my screen, but I do know that there are exemptions that are listed, things like producing flyers and printouts and such things like that, that you would be using for your own self for in purposes of your campaign, opposed to things that council would approve on its own as a whole, if that helps.
Yeah. I just wondered if those were the things that were related to the blackout period. That's 3.2.
Okay. The clerk stated a few of the items that would be involved. Do you have the list in front of you, Councillor Stewart?
I'm just
Yes, I do. Oh.
Sorry, I'm just trying to open up in a different way. I seem to be having trouble on the computer, so let me
Do you just want the council to read it?
She can
Yeah.
if she.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It
go ahead.
says 3.2, blackout period refers to the temporary period from the day upon which a candidate has filed their nomination up to and including election day, during which time certain privileges are discontinued for members of council, the mayor, and any registered candidate. So my question was in 4.4, like some of the things that the clerk mentioned, just want to see if those are the things that are covered under 3.2 in the blackout period.
Yes, those are. Thank you. I have been able to pull it up, and yes, those are.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other questions or comments on 10.2.1? Not seeing any, Madam Clerk?
Thank you. The vote begins with Councillor Olson.
Yes.
Councillor Stewart.
Yes.
Councillor Wink.
Yes.
Councillor Hahn.
Yes.
Councillor Hildebrandt.
Yes.
Councillor Kaur.
Yes.
Mayor Junkin.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That does carry. That does bring you to your next item, which is a staff report from the Planning Department. And I do have a motion put forth by Councillor Hildebrandt, seconded by Councillor Wink. Be it resolved that Council receive Report 2022-75 for information as it pertains to files numbers 26T19-01-2020 and AM02-2020, and that the proposed changes to the draft plan of subdivision for zoning bylaw amendment related to Forest Park are minor in nature and no further public meeting is required, and that council directs planning staff to prepare the bylaw for approval of the zoning bylaw amendment for council's consideration, and that council approve the draft plan of subdivision attached as Appendix A to the subject of the conditions in Appendix B. To you, Mr. Mayor, for discussion.
Okay, thank you, Madam Clerk. Any discussion, comments on this 10.2.2? Councillor Hildebrandt.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I have a lot of comments. First of all, the fact that we've had a public meeting previously which dealt with both subdivisions, and now we got an individual subdivision, changes things considerably, and I don't consider that to be a minor revision. So I definitely would like another public meeting so residents will be able to respond to all the changes and the questions that I've been receiving on this file. I don't think they're minor, I think they're major. The things like Port Robinson and Station Street intersection design, I know the report says that'll be coming to us later. I think that needs another discussion. The interrelated services between the development and any crossing of the Steve Bauer Trail and vegetation removal needs to be addressed. Stormwater management and related ponds. And I'm going to be addressing the reports that I've got from the consultants, which is over 100 pages of reading. But I'll just highlight some of the things that in summary they're saying. In the Beacon report, they're saying a number of plan designs and construction mitigation measures have been identified that will be limited and associated with the subject lands and adjacent lands. In addition, the EISI has identified specific plans that are to be developed as the condition of development approval proceeds, including a buffer planning. So I don't think those plans are complete. And then going on to the report by hundreds of pages of stuff here. This is by, let me get this information. The next planning consultant. Anyway, there was three or four big, huge reports. One of the things they're saying here is, I'm not sure when the study was taken here, but they're saying that the following conclusions are provided. The ponds and the wetlands have been observed to be dry under pre-development conditions. I think if they were dry, they probably reviewed them in the summertime. And there will be changes, in my view, when additional drainage from Pelham Street and the development of Kunda Park occurs. So I think there's some of these comments that need to be addressed. With over 100 pages of detailed specs to read in a short amount of time, it left me very little time to really address all the concerns I had in that area. So that's another area I need to address. The parking design was not really reported on in the report, and the apartment buildings just showed streets. I understand I've had communications with the planning department that provided some answers, but I think the residents need to hear about those things. And the other concern I have is I've approved several developments in the past, and the developer we seem to approve it at some stage, and then the developer flips the arrangement. Now I know right now we're talking 4, 5, or 6 story apartment buildings in the proposed design, but 10 stories are allowed. With the price of all the apartments that are available, I'm not convinced that everything will stay at the limit that's listed in the report. So those are my concerns and my comments at this point. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Hildebrand. Before I go to any more councillors, perhaps Director of Public Planning, Director of Planning, Ms. Weens, any comments on those concerns?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, through you, if I may. So this is a draft plan of subdivision and zoning bylaw amendment application. It had its own public meeting. And then there was a second public meeting, a separate public meeting for the Kunda Park. They are 2 separate applications, and they are to be dealt with individually. The change that was made to this plan from what was presented at the public meeting is one minor change where Street A is connected through to Walker Road as opposed to terminating at Marie Street. It initially proposed to terminate at Marie Street and not extend at Walker Road. So that was the only change that's been made to this plan since the plan of subdivision was presented at the public meeting. There is a difference of 2 residential units as a result, and it is staff's opinion that that change is minor, and there isn't a need to go back to the public for a further public meeting. The zoning bylaw will restrict the building height on the apartment block, and it will have heights ranging between 3 and 6 stories, with 6 being the maximum for the building at the corner of Station Street and Port Robinson Road. And the other buildings will be less than 6 stories. So with respect to the servicing aspects, there are no services through the Kunda Park development. Kunda Park will be serviced on its own and doesn't rely on the Forest Park plan for water, sanitary, servicing, or road connections. There will be some overland flow that currently from Kunda Park does currently overland flows go through this site, and we do have to accommodate those on this site because that is the pre-development condition. And so those will continue to be accommodated on this site, and those pre-developed or overland flows will be directed to the existing culvert that exists and crosses Steve Bauer Trail. So there aren't any new crossings proposed on the Steve Bauer Trail. With respect to the studies that Councillor Hildebrandt referenced, the environmental impact study and the peer review of that study and the water balancing report that was done, all of those studies were reviewed by professionals at the region and or at the Niagara Peninsula Conservation Authority, and they concurred with the findings of those studies, and the recommendations of those studies are included as draft plan conditions. This is quite typical, and we are at the stage where we are doing draft plan approval. The detailed engineering design follows after draft plan approval. It is not something that is done before. Developers need to know that they will have, some degree of certainty at the draft approval stage before they do detailed engineering design, because that costs several thousands of dollars, and that is how development approvals occur in Ontario, is that you get to a point where you have draft plan approval with conditions, and that's the conditional approval that is given, and final approval happens after you clear and deal with all those conditions. So this is pretty standard and normal. It's how, development applications proceed through the planning and the engineering approval stages that are required ultimately prior to anything occurring. So we are quite comfortable in bringing the Forest Park subdivision forward. Kunda Park is a separate development, and the two are not reliant or connecting with one another. And it was based on council's previous direction that there wouldn't be any street crossings. And so those are not happening. There's no interconnection of municipal water or sanitary sewer or anything like that between those two developments. They are separate, and they will be developed individually.
Thank you for that, Ms. Weens. Any further comments, Councillor Hildebrand?
Yeah, one last comment. I believe for transparency, I as a councillor will be voting for another public meeting, because I think my residents expect that. They want that. They think they need clarification of what they have, and they think it's major, and you're saying it's minor. And I represent the residents that think it's major. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Hildebrand. Councillor Hahn.
Thank you. Through the mayor, I echo Councillor Hildebrand in that I have an abundance of residents in Ward 3, particularly in the Kunda area. They're very concerned. Yes, we've had a meeting, but at that time, they were led to believe that, well, we all were, that it was going to be together. We looked at pictures of this development that would be together. There was going to be a crossing. I'm very pleased to know there won't be a crossing, so that's excellent. But they're still concerned with regards to using any town land for any stormwater management, and just the culvert and the flow of the water and the lowland and people having issues with, just the water and the flow with regards to sump pumps and being so low. They haven't heard back from their questions that they asked to begin with. So now they're hearing, in the past week or so that all of a sudden now this is going to be separate. So there's a lot of confusion, and I think that in order to be very clear and transparent with our residents, I think the opportunity to have a meeting with them would be appropriate, so that there's any remaining questions, people can ask them. They fire off the questions ahead of time, or they can ask them at that time. And it doesn't look like we're trying to, get anything passed without anybody knowing. There's been obviously a change of plans, and it's that change that we haven't all caught up with. So for clarity, I think that we need to have a meeting for certain.
Okay, thank you, Counselor. Any other, Counselor, Director of Planning, Ms. Weens?
Mr. Mayor, if I may, so, you know, the change that has occurred is with the Kunda Park plan, not with this plan. It was Kunda Park that was going to be connected to these, and that's no longer happening. So, you know, I think there would be further public meetings with the Kunda Park development because that one is changing. But this plan is fairly, you know, very much the same. And the issues that the public raised are certainly addressed in the staff report. And so there were very few issues with respect to the Forest Park development during the public meeting. Most of the issues were raised on the Kunda Park subdivision. It was always the intent that Forest Park would be developed first, and that hasn't changed from the beginning. That was always articulated to the public at both public meetings, that Forest Park would be developed first, and it is. And that's why this is coming forward. We haven't yet received the revised plan for the Kunda Park. And there is, you know, when we get that, we will be dealing with that when that comes forward.
So further to that then, do you have an estimated time when you will be receiving that revised plan for Kunda?
Mr. Mayor, through you, at this point in time, I do not. I know the developer is focusing on the Forest Park lands, and but I have not seen any revised submission on the Kunda Park one.
I have to say that generally there's a lot of confusion, a lot of questions. Questions I can't answer. Some people I know have directed them to yourself and to Shannon, which is great. But there's still a lot of folks saying they haven't heard back for their concerns. And I think just for clarity, and so there isn't this confusion, if it's possible to get this revised plan from Kunda, and if it's not far off, and to have a meeting and have a discussion about both developments because they're the same owner, and have a fulsome meeting so people can ask the questions about both, that would make the most sense. So there is complete transparency and clarity provided. People don't have to wonder, you know, when this one's happening, that one's happening, and now they're separated and things such as that, because there's a great deal of confusion. And I really feel that if I voted in favor tonight of this, I would be doing a disservice to the residents that have shared many concerns with me. So I would have to, at this point in time, I can't support this.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other comments or questions? Councillor Olson first, and then Councillor Wink.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I believe it's common that we don't we vote for single projects at this one at a time. I think that's happened so many times in the past since I've been sitting here. Is that correct, Ms. Weens? Just one at a time.
Director of Planning.
Mr. Mayor, yes, Mr. Mayor, through you. I mean, certainly that has been the case. We did Saffron Meadows in, you know, 3 different stages. They were all individual applications dealt individually on their own. Again, the Kunda Park is a separate application from this one, and it was never combined with this application. They've always been 2 separate applications.
Councillor Olson, any other comments?
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Wink?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to echo Ms. Weens' comments. This is a draft plan. There is numerous reports by professionals that still have to be provided, but this is providing the foundation for the subdivision. So for example, I know there's issues with respect to water, but water course, stormwater management, water and sanitary sewer services are addressed in Appendix B of this report. Engineering design and reports need to be submitted in accordance to the Ministry of Environment Regulations, Niagara Region, NPCA, town engineer, and the town planner. So there's still a ton of work to be done before it actually comes to fruition. But we need this draft report to get there. Additionally, alignment of Station Street. Reports and studies need to be completed as it appears that a traffic circle is not a viable solution. Steve Bauer Trail will not be crossed with the exception of trail connections for bikes and pedestrians and sewer work underneath the trail. So there will be some work on the trail. My question will be answered a little bit later, but will there be trail connections for bicycles and pedestrians to the Steve Bauer Trail? Archaeological concerns are addressed in the items 78 through 81 in Appendix B, that there still has to be archaeological reports to be done on this, but that's after the draft approval. Item 82 addresses bird and bat nesting concerns. 84 addresses tree savings plan that has to be approved by the region, and any tree elimination must be replaced by 3 plantings in accordance to the tree management policy. We can't expect that there will not be a few trees taken down. It will happen, just to circumvent the extension of Station Street, and also to do some of the work with respect to the sewers going underneath, or the drainage going underneath the trail. But that's being addressed. What I would like from Ms. Weens is there going to be those connections for cycling and pedestrians to the Steve Bauer Trail? And also, I'd like to make comment on Block 90. This is a heck of an improvement that we're getting in this report. The East Fonthill secondary plan was approved in 2013. The plan allows for a higher density in this area, and in fact allows for apartment buildings up to 10 stories. I know people were up in arms when they found out that that was a possibility. Now, I appreciate the developer's conceptual site plan to limit the height of the apartment buildings to 6 stories maximum. And I think on his concept design, in fact, it was 5 stories was the tallest building. So, I don't see why we have to hold up a developer, which we've done for God knows how long now, for months and months and months, when everything we've asked to date, he's provided. So, Ms. Weens, if you can address the connections for me, please.
Ms.
Yes,
Weens?
Mr. Mayor, through you, there will be pedestrian connections. We do want the residents of this subdivision, this development, to be able to connect to the Steve Bauer Trail. And Walker Road has been designed in the Saffron subdivision, and it will continue through with this subdivision, the same kind of design with a dedicated bike track or cycle track as it's known, and it will also connect to the Steve Bauer Trail, so that you have very much an integrated and connected pedestrian system. We want to have one of the pedestrian crossings in the general location of where the existing culvert is. There is an opening there, so there would be very little tree removal, if any, required to accommodate that pedestrian connection. And it will then connect with the pathway that's in the watercourse, providing for a connected and linked pedestrian system. And the storm from the overland flow from Kunda will enter through that culvert as well. So there won't be another servicing crossing over the Steve Bauer Trail. They will use that existing culvert. So, so there will be 2 pedestrian connections, one for cyclists and one for just a sidewalk connection.
Great.
Councillor?
Thank you, Ms.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Olson?
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor, to Ms. Weens. Am I right in my understanding of the drawings that there won't be a crossing of the Steve Bauer Trail of Utilities?
Mr. Mayor, through you, that's correct. There won't be any crossing of utilities. I think it's also important to note that the plan does conform to the East Fenwick secondary plan. It is, or East Font Hill, pardon me, thank you. Secondary plan, it is very much consistent with that. The wetland lands are not within this subdivision plan. They are outside of the plan of subdivision, but the appropriate buffers are being provided to that. And there are conditions that require that the buffer area be planted to enhance that buffer. Currently, the buffer area, what is the buffer, was farmed right to the edge of the wetland, and so that buffer area will be improved with plantings when this, if this were to get approved.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments, Councillor Olson?
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. So they are indeed separate in all ways, including the linkages through the utilities and et cetera. Then we're going to have the bicycle pass and the pedestrian pass. Okay, thank you.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, Kunda Park will be serviced from extensions on Kunda Park Boulevard and the looping of the water on Stella Street. So all those, that's how Kunda Park was always envisioned to be serviced and developed for many years.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Weens. Councillor Hahn?
Through the mayor, so it's important to note that, per my earlier discussion, and that is that I'm not saying no, I'm saying I need to provide residents more information. And unless you can figure out another way to do this by mailing or another means for them to ask questions and get answers, I just don't feel comfortable at this time that there's an abundance of questions coming at me. And people are wondering why they're not getting answered and what to do next and the timing. So when you say months and months and we're delaying and we're costing everybody money, blah, blah, blah. No, shouldn't take months and months. We should be able to put together some form of communication, meeting or some other form of communication in pretty short order. And I don't know why that we would object to providing residents that opportunity.
Yeah, any comment, Ms. Weens? I believe there has to be a certain amount of time to announce a public meeting. What's the protocol on that?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, there's certainly a 20-day notice requirement for public meetings. We have public meetings scheduled the second Mondays of the month. We already have those advertised for the next ones coming in April, of course, and I can tell you that there will be 2 more in May and likely 1 more in June, just given the amount of development applications that we have. If we have a special council meeting or public meeting, it would have to be, we'd have to find another date that council is willing to meet to do that outside of those dates.
No, okay, thank you. Thank you for that. Any other comments or questions before we call the vote? Not seeing any. Councillor Hildebrand.
I agree with Councillor Hahn. I'm not saying that absolute is a public meeting. The absolute is the communication with residents, and that's the issue I'm dealing with. So, and that's the residents I represent. So somehow we've got to come up with a communication plan to deal with their concerns and answers to their questions. That's the issue.
So, Mr. Mayor, I can advise that we did provide, residents that came to the public meeting and spoke on this. We did make them aware of this report going and provided them copies of it or where to connect to see a copy of the report. We tried to keep the residents informed. Anyone that's reached out to us with questions, we've certainly have responded to them.
Thank you for that, Ms. Weens. Councillor Hahn?
Thank you, through the mayor. I think that there's also kind of an assumption going on here that there's an expectation that all residents are reading our agendas that was only published, Tuesday, and that they would know all this information and then have the 2 hours or more to read all these reports. That's not reality. That doesn't happen. People have lives and they don't always do that. It would be nice if they did, but that's not the case. So not everyone watches these meetings. Not everyone reads the agendas. So there has to be a better way to communicate with them and not assume that they're taking the same route that councillors have to, and that is by attending meetings and reading these long agendas. So there has to be another way to speak to these folks, and that's all I'm asking for, is an opportunity to communicate with them.
And perhaps, Councillor Hahn, you could suggest a better way. We have had a public meeting, and anybody who had questions at the public meeting we held, the planning department has answered them. So I guess the question is, what's a better way then? Please.
So through you, so perhaps if we've got names and addresses of folks that have asked many questions before, if what you're saying is that every single person has had a summary provided to them, I'm guessing that's not in fact the case. Maybe it's just simply putting a summary together, a Q&A, a few pages of Q&A. Here's the top 10 questions that have been asked. Here's the answers. Here's our time frame. Here's the position that we're at, and here's where we see ourselves going. If there's additional questions, write in, mail them in. If we wanted to have an opportunity at one of our council meetings to have people communicate with us, it's not just, this is some time ago, this was last year, and we're talking about just Kunda, and at that time, it was assumed, and we were looking at pictures, we all did, where we looked at the grand scheme, right? And that was both of the developments together. And then that's when we, of course, had to make our decision whether we're going to do crossings. That isn't what we're looking at today. And so what I'm asking for is not a tall order. And I think we have a communications specialist on payroll. So perhaps that person can also assist us in this regard. There's different opportunities here. And I don't think that I should be, or anyone else on council should be, spoken down to, because we want to communicate properly with our residents.
Oh, and I agree with you totally. It's just that how many times do you have a communication, public meeting and what have you, and after you do all that, maybe you still miss 2 or 3 people. Do you again halt everything because you missed 2 or 3 people? There's no perfect way that you're going to get everyone. Someone's going to say, well, gee, I didn't know about the meeting. I didn't know about the summary. I didn't know about this. I don't know. It boggles my mind that if someone actually has complaints, I'm sure they've taken them to you and to Mr. Hildebrand, and I'm sure you funneled them onto the planning department. I don't know why that, which is what you're asking to do now, is for the planning department to put together a summary. I don't know why that wouldn't have taken place in the last, whether it be week or 2 weeks or a couple of days even. So,
well, we wouldn't have, excuse me though, to answer your question, we wouldn't have had that information. We only just got this agenda and all the reports on Tuesday. So I'm now 6 days in, asking for that information. So that's why.
Well, and also the planning director has pointed out the only difference in the plan between the planning meeting and now is the extension of a road. Everything else has stayed the same, according to the planning director, that I have to take her word on. But anyway, let's, Ms. Weens, do you see any other way that we could reach out? You can make your department, I don't know, more accessible. I don't know. I don't know, I need some guidance here, or should we, I mean, if
Mr.
we,
Mayor,
yes?
I mean, certainly we have answered anyone who's reached out to us. We've spoken with them or communicated via email and addressed their questions. We are, have a statutory obligation in terms of public meetings and those kind of things. So if we have to meet those Planning Act requirements with respect to that. So, there in terms of the public participation, I cannot give information to some and not others, and that's why we have public meetings so that everybody hears the same thing and council has the ability to receive the same information. The report addressed the public comments that we received at the public meeting. We did reach out to those that attended the Forest Park public meeting and informed them that this was coming, and provided them with the report or how to access the report. So if we're going to be going out and communicating to some and not others, that is problematic.
Okay, thank you for that. Mr. CAO, do you have any comments?
I do.
Okay, go ahead, sir.
The question council needs to ask itself this evening is, do you want to be the approval authority? If the answer to that is yes, you need to vote in the affirmative tonight. And you do that because this is draft plan. It's early on. If you order a public meeting, which may well be where you go, essentially the same material will be brought back. As Ms. Weens indicated, this discussion started with Councillor Hildebrand quite fairly pointing out that he still has a lot of questions. There are a lot of, not everything's nailed down, there's studies not done, information not known. But the problem is you have the right to ask the questions, but you don't have the right to an answer right now. That's how the system works. When draft plan is approved, then money will be spent on those subsequent studies. So right now there aren't answers to a lot of the questions that Councillor Hahn very fairly and very appropriately wants to answer for the residents. We appreciate that there are unanswered questions, but we are so early in the state, although we've been at this for a couple of years now, we're still early in that stage. And if you grant that approval, then money gets spent on those studies. And this may well come back. It's April 2022. 6 months from now is the election. If we go another public meeting, I don't know whether or not the developer will be able to answer any more of those questions without having conducted any more of the studies. And I don't know why they would do any more of the studies until they get draft plan. Also, to Ms. Ween's point, we have statutory deadlines imposed on us by the Planning Act, and we're running up into those. So if you grant the draft plan, we still have all of those conditions, and then we'll get more information, and then you have the capacity to, to really get into it. Right now, if we go to a public meeting, I don't know that there will be any better answers. There will be more time, and really the developer sort of drives this process, but I don't know when it comes back. So really, it's for the reason of, like, we could get more answers if we just move the ball a little further down the field. And that's really what the draft plan point in time is. This is the one that has to go first, because you'll recall, and as the report indicates, the density here is what allows Kunda Park with lesser density. So we really need to address this one first. And the question in my mind is whether it's going to get addressed before or after October 2022. And I think you're going to decide that in a couple of minutes with a vote.
Thank you, Mr. CAO, and Councillor Hahn.
Yes, thank you through the mayor to the CAO. So I guess my question then, David, would be, do you have another suggestion, right? You've been down this path before, I'm sure, with other municipalities. So what is your suggestion then, instead of delaying for a public meeting, another route that we can take to communicate, and fully recognizing we can't communicate with some and not with others, but reaching out. You used to have what was it called, Talk with Tara back in the day. There was those
Tuesdays with Tara.
Thank you. That exactly. So you have there was some back and forth, right? There was some questions with answers. People felt at ease. You have to respect the position that Councillor Hildebrand and I are in. Like, this is our ward, right? This is our turf, and people are very hesitant and very unsure, right? And uncertain, and it's an uncomfortable place for them to be. So if is an opportunity for them to have that kind of back and forth, maybe you can make a suggestion. Maybe there's a solution here.
So Ms. Weens is the primary point of contact with the developer. My office is not. But I do understand that generally, and I think the record reflects that generally speaking, when council indicates a preference for something, generally speaking, this developer has been fairly compliant with that. I think what I'd suggest, keeping in mind that regardless of what the developer says, I would endorse you supporting this tonight so that we can get more answers and we can make a better quality development for the community. But I think we take your statements tonight as direction to request that nevertheless we plan a second public meeting, even though you're giving this approval, and we plan it for whatever that is, maybe June, to reiterate Ms. Ween's comments. So I think we ask for that because generally speaking, developments go better when there's better communication. Would they be legally obligated? No, but so far they've been pretty cooperative. And maybe by June, they will be able to answer questions, whether or not they've got those studies entirely done at that point. The difficult thing here is there are a number of very fair questions our residents have that just can't be answered right now. And it's extremely dissatisfying to say it's too early or it's premature. But the way this sort of awkward process that we call development runs is they're waiting for their draft plan approval before a couple of things are done, and they're allowed to wait. So that's where we are. My advice is both pass this tonight and also direct us to request a public meeting with the developer's good graces, and let's do that too. Because it really is, I agree with Ms. Weens, there's nothing better than a public meeting. I mean, we can support it online. We can, provide links to resources, et cetera, but I don't think there's anything quite as good as being able to look someone in the eye and ask the questions. And certainly our history indicates that a lot of people will come out.
Okay, thank you for that, Mr. CAO. Any other comments? Councillor Hildebrand.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the CEO. I appreciate those comments because really that's all people are looking for. They want to look us in the eye and make sure their questions are answered as best we can. They're not looking for perfect answers from me or from staff. They just want to make sure that their concerns are heard and their voices are heard. So thank you for that suggestion, and the public meeting scheduled coming forward would be great. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Hildebrand. Any other comments or questions before we call the vote? Not seeing any, I turn to the clerk.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. I just need to confirm if council so wishes to vote on the main motion as presented, or if they're looking for an amendment to also include, and that council directs staff to request the developer hold an additional public meeting. I just want to make sure I have that direction clear.
Councillor Hahn?
Thank you. Through the mayor to the clerk, that would be my choice, would be to, if this is going to be passed, then absolutely has to have a second meeting.
Okay, so I do have Councillor Hahn as the mover that in addition to the paragraphs already stated, that it would also include, and that council directs staff to request the developer to hold an additional public meeting. I would need a seconder.
Okay, is there a seconder? Councillor Hildebrand. Oh, wait. Councillor, I'm sorry, Director of Planning Weens.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, through you. I just want some clarification. Are you wanting this to be a public meeting in front of all of council, or is it more of a public information session that can be held outside of a council meeting schedule?
Councillor Hahn or Councillor Hildebrand?
I'm not sure if you had a preference for that. And
Councillor Hildebrand?
Through you to the Director of Public Planning, I'm acceptable to either one.
Okay.
I don't think it has to be, I mean, obviously, I'm sure Councillor Hahn, if she's available, if her work schedule doesn't interfere, will be there. If it can be scheduled in the evening, I'll definitely be there either time.
Thank you. Councillor Hahn?
Yes, thank you. I think, through the mayor, I think for me, as long as people have, sufficient advance notice, either can work. They need to have the notice and have the opportunity to attend, or whether it's virtual or what have you, just so it's not, they've only got a couple days and they didn't know about it, right? So I don't want any of these claim they didn't know about it kind of thing. So as long as they have advance notice, then yes.
Yeah, and I just wanted to know whether or not a quorum of council would be needed for this, because that,
Do you find more like a better turnout, or do you find one more effective than the other? You've got more experience in that.
No, it doesn't matter to me. I'm just trying to figure out your schedule and your meeting schedule, and if it doesn't require a quorum of council, that gives us a little bit more flexibility in finding dates. That's all.
The CAO has a question. Maybe you can address this.
CAO?
Well, I do think that public meetings, those open forum meetings with a semi-hot mic that sort of allow people is certainly the way to go in this instance, because I'm vicariously aware of the large number of questions coming your respective ways. But nothing forestalls both. I think we'd like to offer both opportunities and possibly do both. It's a different sort of meeting when it's in front of council. Obviously, you're all very informed, but we can't let the public ask questions so that the meeting has some structure. So I would actually try to accomplish both in this instance, but if we could only be one, I would go the public forum meeting so that they can get their answers straight from the horse's mouth, so to speak.
Good. Sounds good.
Okay, Councillor Court, do you have your hand up? No? Okay, I guess not.
No, Your Honor.
Okay, sorry. Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Madam Clerk?
Thank you. If it's acceptable to Councillor Hahn and Councillor Hildebrand, I just amended that language just to say hold an additional public information session meeting through that discussion, as long as that's acceptable. I'm not seeing any objection.
Yes.
Mr. Mayor, is there any further debate on the amendment?
Okay, any further debate on the amendment before us? Not seeing any, Madam Clerk?
Thank you. The vote begins with Councillor Hahn.
Yes.
Councillor Hildebrand.
Yes.
Councillor Kaur.
Yes.
Councillor Olson.
Yes.
Councillor Stewart.
Yes.
Councillor Wink.
Yes.
Mayor Junkin.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the amendment does carry. That will bring you to the main motion as amended. Does council have any other?
Any other discussion on the main motion as amended? Not seeing any, Madam Clerk?
Thank you. I will just, I would be looking for a mover on that.
Oh, I need a mover. Councillor Hahn, and seconder, Councillor Kaur.
Thank you. This vote will begin with Councillor Hildebrand.
Yes.
Councillor Kaur.
Yes.
Councillor Olson.
Yes.
Councillor Stewart.
Yes.
Councillor Wink.
Yes.
Councillor Hahn.
Yes.
Mayor Junkin.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That does carry. Mr. Mayor, that brings you to your next staff item, which is the vaccination policy review. And I have a motion put forth by Councillor Olson, seconded by Councillor Stewart. Be it resolved that Council receive report 2022-00 74 COVID-19 vaccination policy review for information, and that council modify the town's existing COVID-19 vaccination policy S101-22 by approving options 1, 5, and 7 only at this time, and that council direct the chief administrative officer to return this policy for further council review and consideration upon any major change in public health conditions, but in any event prior to December 31st, 2023. To you, Mr. Mayor, for discussion.
Okay, thank you. Council, we've already heard from the CAO and legal in a closed session. Mr. CAO, do you have anything to add in open session, or should we just go to council?
Staff have reviewed our needs as a municipal corporation, our needs as an employer, and then also tried to take into account public sentiment. The reason we come to you with these recommendations are that we think for the health and safety of our staff, option 1 is important at this point in time, and it's premature to make a change to that. However, also recognizing changes both in the environment and at law, we see no reason to differentiate between those who volunteer on the various advisory committees and anyone else who enters either town hall or the MCC. And secondly, that third-party contractors, like any other members of the public, can enter our buildings, and to the extent that close physical contact might be needed in the conduct of whatever repair or maintenance duties are involved. Frankly, a number of our staff can work from home and or we just simply relocate them during those times. So we think those are changes that can be made that will make life easier, both for some of our volunteers and for some of our contractors, but also protect health and safety. That's fundamentally the notion and how we got to these recommendations. Happy to take questions, and I appreciate that this is a difficult issue and that it's an issue upon which reasonable people can and do disagree. Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Okay, thank you, Mr. CAO. I now turn to council. Any questions or comments on the 7 options before us? Councillor Hildebrand.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Well, because of the discussions we previously had, I'd like to vote on, divide and separate each option and vote on each one separately.
Okay, thank you for that, Councillor Hildebrand. Councillor Hahn, did I see your hand up?
Yes, you did, through the mayor. I think much like COVID, like the virus, like this pandemic, it's ever changing. And I think that with that comes the stance, the opinion, the facts. That's changed too. That was then, this is now. I think that when we put this policy in place, which was some time ago, I think that was needed. But now we're in a different, it's a different climate. We no longer have to wear masks. It's an option now. It's not mandated. Many companies no longer have their policies in effect. They've made changes. They recognized that it's a different time. I think by suspending our policy, it allows us, if things turn south, and who knows what could happen, it allows us a position to reenact it if need be. But I think that for me, I need to recognize and have recognized that that this is a different time. So my vote would be at this point in time to suspend it, like so many other of the neighboring municipalities have already done. So this isn't unique. It has, we've got a list here of, I think we're up to 6 now of other municipalities have suspended and some have repealed, but I would suspend this at this time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for those comments. Any other councillor? Councillor Stewart.
Yes, thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. I'm also in favor of suspending the current policy. That way we're in a position that if we need to reimpose a COVID policy, or possibly for any other terrible illness that could befall us, that we have the framework in place, and it would be easy to amend it to function as we would need it in that circumstance. So I would be in favor of suspending at this time.
Okay, thank you for those comments, councillor. Any other comments at this time? I think, Councillor Wink, just before you do, I will state my preference again. I think that as a corporation, we have to take into our the considerations of the health and safety of our employees. As much as we don't like it, the virus is still around. It's around in a diminished form, for sure. But as a board on a corporate entity, I'm going to err on the side of safety, and I will not be voting to suspend the policy. Councillor Wink?
So just piggybacking on what you said, and there was comments about looking at 1, 5, and 7, but then reviewing it again in 6 months. And yes, it should be reviewed again, but I concur with the mayor's comments that we maintain the status quo to be reviewed in another 6 months.
Okay. Thank you for those comments, Councillor. Any other council? Not seeing any. I turn to the vote, and Madam Clerk, it looks like it's being asked that we vote on each individual motions or item separately. Is this, does this conform?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I would say not to do it that way. My concern is, right now, the recommendation states, options 1, 5, and 7. Certainly, council could amend to strike those options and insert different options. What my concern is, if you were to vote in this order, if council voted in the positive, maintain the status quo, and then you were to vote again, perhaps in the positive on suspend the current policy, they conflict, and that does not help staff have directions. So I would suggest to council, if they're unsatisfied with staff's direction, that a councillor could bring a motion to amend. Perhaps it is for item number 2, suspend the current policy, and vote on that and see if that passes or fails. I think you'll have a problem if you go through the list the way that it is. I don't know if the CAO, he looked as though he had comments.
Mr. CAO?
Well, we're also heading imminently towards absurd result, which might be that you vote to suspend the policy and then that you vote to make changes to it. If it is the will of council to suspend against staff advice, so very well, so be it. But then please simply suspend the policy as it is. Don't make any changes. I don't think you can make a change to something once you suspended it anyway. I think that's a moot point. But even if I'm wrong about that, then the thing we'd bring back wouldn't offer full protection. So I really think you ought to consider whether you're going to, the question comes whether, we haven't heard from all 7 of you, so I don't know where the vote's going to go. But it's either suspend or maintain status quo. That seems to be the choice, the binary choice. So I think you have a vote on whichever one of those first, and then everything else follows. If it's maintain status quo, then staff advice to you is nevertheless to make some changes so that the policy only applies to a more limited population. If it's suspended, then it's suspended in its entirety and you don't make any further changes. So that would be the choice here.
I apologize, Mr. Mayor. If I may, it is 9 o'clock. We are at curfew. We would need to extend curfew, so I would be looking for a mover and a seconder and to when they'd like to extend.
Okay, thank you. We need a mover, Councillor Kaur, and a seconder, Councillor Hildebrand.
Would you like it to be until all business on the agenda has been concluded?
Councillor Kaur?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hildebrand, you're okay with that as a seconder?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is there any other discussion, Mr. Mayor?
Any other discussion on extending curfew? I see Councillor Hildebrand.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the CAO. Would you like me then to make a motion to adopt the policy 2 to suspend the policy? And once we have that vote, then we know what we have to do with the rest of the item?
I think that's ideal. If it passes, we're done with the item and we move on to the next piece on the agenda.
Right.
or adjourn for the evening. And if it doesn't pass, then I think obviously then it's status quo, but then you deal with the amendments.
Thank you.
That would be ideal, sir.
I'll make
Okay.
such a motion then. Thank you.
If we could just first continue with
Yeah,
the
we have
waiving
to
of
do
curfew.
the curfew.
So I do have a motion put forth by Councillor Kaur, seconded by Councillor Hildebrand, that curfew be waived until all matters listed on the agenda have been concluded.
Any discussion? Not seeing any?
Thank you. Councillor Hahn.
Yes.
Councillor Hildebrand.
Yes.
Councillor Kaur.
Yes.
Councillor Olson.
Yes.
Councillor Stewart.
Yes.
Councillor Wink.
Yes.
Mayor Junkin.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Your curfew has been waived. So certainly what I'm hearing is that Councillor Hildebrand is indicating that he would like to make an amendment to strike options 1, 2, and 7 and insert option 2, which is to suspend. Is that correct?
That's correct.
He would need a seconder.
Is there a seconder on this motion? I do not see a seconder. Councillor Kaur, you'll second?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so then the motion on the floor is to amend the motion to strike option 1, 2, and 7 and insert number 2 to suspend the policy to you, Mr. Mayor, for discussion.
Okay, now discussion on this motion before us. Councillor Olson.
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor, I think suspending our policy is a mistake. We have a number of people who will be placed in the position of working beside someone who may not be vaccinated properly. It's a health and safety issue. We have people who have gone out and got the vaccination because of our policy. I think this is not the thing to do. We can build in a policy of review and revision as it comes up, and it says right there that when conditions change. The COVID's not gone away. We've got 135 cases in the last month. I don't think we're giving due care and attention to the health and safety of our citizens or our employees by doing this.
Thank you for those comments. Councillor Olson, Councillor Stewart.
Yes, thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. By suspending the policy, it's not revoking it. It's there, it's available. If things change, we can review it and we can reimpose it with whatever amendments we need to make to it. It's not a revocation.
Okay, thank you for those comments, Councillor Stewart. Any other comments before Councillor Olson?
That's called locking the door after the horse has run out of the barn.
Thank you, Councillor Olson. Any other comments, Councillor Hahn?
Yes, thank you, through the mayor. So as I mentioned earlier, times they are changing. And so the fact that masks are completely optional now, you can go to the bank, you can go to the grocery store, to a restaurant. Nobody's asking you to wear a mask. And also at the same time, nobody's asking you to show a vaccination passport anymore. As I mentioned earlier, our neighboring municipalities, half of the municipalities thus far, only by virtue of they had their meeting in the past week or so, have already put their policy on a suspension mode. So we're not doing anything particularly out of the ordinary in contrast to our neighbors. If things, like I said, turn south and masks are mandated again, passports are mandated again, I mean, who knows what the future should hold. Then we're in a position, as Councillor Stewart suggested, to reevaluate. So this is a changing landscape, and I think that we need to adopt to the current climate. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Olson, and then we.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, through you, Mr. Mayor. I hope you're right.
Okay, thank you. Everyone has, I believe everyone has spoken on the issue. Is there any other last comments before we call the vote? Okay, thank you. I turn to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So this is for the amendment, and the vote would begin with Councillor Hahn.
Yes.
Councillor Hildebrandt.
Yes.
Councillor Kaur.
Yes.
Councillor Olson.
No.
Councillor Stewart.
Yes.
Councillor Wink.
No.
Mayor Junkin.
No.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That does carry. That brings you to the main motion as amended. But to you, Mr. Mayor, for any discussion.
I'm sorry. Yeah, any other, I am, if I can, Madam Clerk, I'd like you to read that motion as it is going to be, please.
Of course. It will be it resolved that Council receive report 2022-0074 COVID-19 vaccination policy review for information, and that Council modify the town's existing COVID-19 vaccination policy S101-22 by approving option 2, bracket suspend, at this time, and that Council direct the Chief Administrative Officer to return this policy for further Council review and consideration upon any major change in public health conditions, but in any event prior to December 31st, 2023.
Okay, thank you for that, Madam Clerk. Any questions or comments on the motion and its amendment?
Well, Your Worship, that last part's no longer necessary, or won't be necessary if the first part passes. So again, we should really restrict this vote to whether or not we're changing, we're moving to a suspension of policy. It makes the second part irrelevant.
Certainly, we could have another motion to amend to strike the last paragraph that wasn't included in the previous, if that's okay and acceptable to the Chief Administrative Officer.
Yes, I can't bring a suspended policy to the council for its review and consideration. So.
Okay.
Okay, so would a councillor move to strike the last paragraph?
Okay, so is everyone agree? Councillor Kaur?
Yes, I'll make a motion to strike it.
Okay. Do we, Madam Clerk, do we need a motion? Yes?
I would say yes.
Okay.
And I would look for a seconder.
Yes, okay. So, yep, we need a seconder, and that'd be Councillor Hildebrand.
Thank you. Is there any other further discussion?
Okay. Any discussion on the motion? Councillor Olson.
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. Could we hear the motion again, please?
Okay.
Certainly, through you, Mr. Mayor, is just to strike the final paragraph of the original main motion, directing the Chief Administrative Officer to return the policy for further council review.
Okay, so this is to strike the amendment.
No, just to strike the last paragraph. The CAO is indicating as if the policy is suspended, and quite so, it means he can't bring a suspended policy back. So it would just be a housekeeping matter just to strike the last paragraph.
Okay. So it's the, to strike the last paragraph. Any discussion on that? I don't see it. Madam Clerk?
The vote begins with Councillor Hahn.
Yes.
Councillor Hildebrandt.
Yes.
Councillor Kaur.
Yes.
Councillor Olson.
No.
Councillor Stewart.
Yes.
Councillor Wink.
No.
Mayor Junkin.
No.
Thank you. We do go back to the main motion as amended. And just for clarity, I'll read it back into the record. It's be it resolved that Council receive report 2022-0074 COVID-19 vaccination policy review for information, and that Council modify the town's existing COVID-19 vaccination policy S101-2022 by approving option 2, suspending at this time. Through you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. We've all heard it again. Any other questions or comments? Not seeing any. Madam Clerk?
Thank you. I am going to just use Councillor Hildebrandt and Councillor Kaur for the mover of that main motion as amended, unless they have any objections.
No, I don't see any.
Okay, thank you. Were there any other comments, or would you like me to call the vote?
Last call. Any other comments or questions? Not seeing any. Madam Clerk?
Thank you. The vote begins again with Councillor Hahn.
Yes.
Councillor Hildebrandt.
Yes.
Counselor Kaur,
Yes.
Counselor Olson,
No.
Counselor Stewart,
Yes.
Counselor Wink,
No.
Mayor Junkin.
No?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That does carry.
Okay.
That does bring you to your next item of business, and that is the presentation and considerations of bylaws. And I have a motion put forth by Councillor Kaur, seconded by Councillor Stewart. Be it resolved that Council of the Town of Pelham, having given due consideration to the following bylaws, do now read a first, second, and third time and do pass same, and that the mayor and clerk be and are hereby authorized to sign and seal the bylaw. 1. Bylaw 4441, 2022, being a bylaw authorizing the borrowing of money to meet current expenditures of the Council of the Corporation of the Town of Pelham, and to repeal or replace bylaw 4312, 2021, being a bylaw authorizing borrowing. 2. Bylaw number 4442, 2022, being a bylaw to amend bylaw number 4063, 2019, as amended, confirming various appointments to boards, commissions, and committees to the Town of Pelham, and to appoint a member to the Pelham Summerfest Committee, Schedule N. 3. Bylaw 444, 2022, being a bylaw to adopt the estimates for the Town of Pelham for its own operation for the year of 2022. To you, Mr. Mayor, for discussion.
Okay, thank you. Any discussions, questions on these bylaws? Councillor Hahn?
Through the mayor, this question is to the clerk. Because I, as I mentioned earlier, had a scheduling conflict, one if not two of these, I wasn't in the original meeting, so I think I will not vote here. So I'll be exempt from voting for these.
Oh, thank you. I'll note that. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Not seeing any, Madam Clerk?
Thank you. I'm just marking Councillor Hans. This vote will begin with Councillor Hildebrandt.
Yes.
Councillor Kaur.
Yes.
Councillor Olson.
Yes.
Councillor Stewart.
Yes.
Councillor Wink.
Yes.
Mayor Junkin.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That does carry. Through you, Mr. Mayor, we do have a motion put forth by Councillor Hahn, seconded by Councillor Wink. Be it resolved that the next portion of the meeting be closed to the public in order to consider a matter under Section 239(2) of the Municipal Act as follows. B, personal matters about an identifiable individual, and D, labor relations or employee negotiations, one item committee appointment. To you, Mr. Mayor, for any discussion.
Thank you. Any discussion on moving in camera? Do not see any.
Thank you. The vote will begin with Councillor Kaur.
Yes.
Councillor Olson.
Yes.
Councillor Stewart.
Yes.
Councillor Wink.
Yes.
Councillor Hahn.
Yes.
Councillor Hildebrandt.
Yes.
Mayor Junkin.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That carries. If council can just give me a few moments just to turn off the recording and the streaming, I
Of
would
course.
appreciate that. Through you, Mr. Mayor, I do have a motion put forth by Councillor Olson, seconded by Councillor Hildebrandt. Be it resolved that council adjourn the in-camera session and that council do now rise with report. To you, Mr. Mayor, for any discussion.
Any discussion? Not seeing any, Madam Clerk?
Thank you. The vote begins with Councillor Kaur.
Yes.
Councillor Olson.
Yes.
Councillor Stewart.
Yes.
Councillor Wink.
Yes.
Councillor Hahn.
Yes.
Councillor Hildebrandt.
Yes.
Mayor Junkin.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That does carry. I do have a motion put forth by Councillor Wink, seconded by Councillor Olson. Be it resolved that council receive the Pelham Summerfest Committee application from Daniel Kilovich, and that council hereby appoint Daniel Kilomovich to the Pelham Summerfest Committee, and that the appointment bylaw be presented at the next regular meeting of council being April 19th, 2022. To you, Mr. Mayor, for any discussion.
Any discussion? Not seeing any, Madam Clerk?
Thank you. This vote begins with Councillor Olson.
Yes.
Councillor Stewart.
Yes.
Councillor Wink.
Yes.
Councillor Hahn.
Yes.
Councillor Hildebrandt.
Yes.
Councillor Kaur.
Yes.
Mayor Junkin.
Yes.
Thank you. That does carry. I do have a motion put forth by Councillor Hahn, seconded by Councillor Wink. Be it resolved that the Chief Administrative Officer is and is hereby authorized to undertake the directions provided during the in-camera meeting of April 4th, 2022. To you, Mr. Mayor, for any discussions.
Yep. Any discussion? Not seeing any?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The vote begins with Councillor Stewart.
Yes.
Councillor Wink.
Yes.
Councillor Hahn.
Yes.
Councillor Hildebrandt.
Yes.
Councillor Kaur.
Yes.
Councillor Olson.
Yes.
Mayor Junkin.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That does carry. I have a motion put forth by Councillor Hahn, seconded by Councillor Hildebrandt. Be it resolved that the following bylaw be ready first, second, and third time and do pass, being bylaw number 4445, 2022, to adopt, ratify, and confirm the proceedings of council at the Town of Pelham at its regular meeting held on the 4th day of April 2022. To you, Mr. Mayor, for any discussion.
Yep. Any discussion? Not seeing any?
Thank you. This begins with Councillor Wink.
Yes.
Councillor Hahn.
Yes.
Councillor Hildebrandt.
Yes.
Councillor Kaur.
Yes.
Councillor Olson.
Yes.
Councillor Stewart.
Yes.
Mayor Junkin.
Yes.
And that does carry. I have a motion put forth by Councillor Olson, seconded by Councillor Hildebrandt. Be it resolved that this regular meeting of council be adjourned until the next regular meeting scheduled for April 19th, 2022 at 5:30 p.m. To you, Mr. Mayor, for discussion.
Not seeing any discussion?
Councillor Hahn.
Yes.
Councillor Hildebrandt.
Yes.
Councillor Kaur.
Yes.
Councillor Olson.
Yes.
Councillor Stewart.
Yes.
Councillor Wink.
Yes.
Mayor Junkin.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That does carry. It is 9:25 p.m. and you can gavel out your meeting.
Good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone.